What the heck? How did I become a computer? In the vastness of space, a small cylindrical spacecraft floated silently. Within the main control computer of the ship, Chen Yue's consciousness was plunged into profound shock. He still remembered what happened before. He had been an astronaut. After years of training on Earth, he embarked on the first human Mars landing mission aboard the spacecraft Yue. After the mission was completed successfully, Chen Yue began his return journey. But before he could reach Earth, he saw Earth explode without warning. A ball of light burst from the core of the Earth, engulfing the entire planet. Then the Earth was shattered into countless fragments, ceasing to exist. Along with it perished the billions of humans living on Earth. All the wealth created by human civilization, all culture, architecture, all love, hatred, grudges, and entanglements, everything turned to ashes with the explosion of the Earth. Earth was gone, humanity was gone. Chen Yue, the last human in the universe, was dumbfounded. Without Earthwork, relying on the remaining supplies aboard the Yue, Chen Yue barely survived for a few months. Then, on the verge of mental collapse, he ate all the remaining food in one go, injected himself with poison, and committed suicide. But unexpectedly, he had come back to life somehow, ending up inside the central computer of the Yue. What happened? What is going on? Why did Earth explode? Who destroyed Earth? How did I end up inside a computer? Chen Yue fell into confusion. It took several hours before Chen Yue barely regained his composure and accepted the fact. Maybe some passing super civilization saved me casually. Merging human consciousness with a computer was obviously beyond the reach of human technology. Only an alien civilization could have done that. It seems I was fated to survive. Merging consciousness with a computer may not be a bad thing. Although I have lost my body, I no longer need food, water, oxygen, warmth, or any life support facilities. And Chen Yue tried to move his thoughts, and suddenly his entire consciousness froze again. If he had eyes at this moment, they would be wide open in shock. The moment he shifted his thoughts and focused, he sensed an overwhelming torrent of computing power. At that moment, he felt he could read and memorize 100,000 papers in an instant, perform hundreds of billions of mathematical operations simultaneously, without error, create 1,000,000 threads at once, and handle 1,000,000 tasks without confusion. At that moment, Chen Yue truly experienced the power of a supercomputer. And now abilities that once belonged only to the computer, which humans could only control indirectly through programs, were entirely his own. Chen Yue felt that at this moment he possessed not only the creativity of a life form of a human, but also the immense computing power and memory of a computer. Chen Yue was almost unable to contain his excitement. Heaven! If I can possess both human and computer abilities, doesn't that mean I alone can accomplish what an entire civilization's combined efforts previously could? I could single-handedly operate machines to build a vast factory and make it run. I could control tens of millions or even hundreds of millions of vehicles to transport materials according to my will. I could command countless robots to conduct experiments and research science. I could integrate countless data sources and advance technological development by myself. When technology becomes advanced enough, I could upgrade this computer I inhabit for even greater power control, even more things, and even create tens of thousands of spaceships and warships on my own and pilot them all solo. The more Chen Yue thought, the more excited he became. At that moment, the gloom brought by the explosion of Earth quietly lifted. He once again saw hope for the future. The telescope mounted on the Yue spacecraft quietly turned, aiming at the direction where Earth used to be. Now the blue planet had vanished, replaced by a vast expanse of white. He knew that was the comet-like tail formed by water ice being evaporated by the sun after Earth's explosion. That was once his home. Also the home of all his relatives, friends, and fellow countrymen. Chen Yue's heart was filled with melancholy. But after melancholy came great excitement. My compatriots wait for me. I don't know why I have merged with a computer, but since heaven has given me this chance, I will surely seize it firmly. I will become stronger and stronger, and the technology one master will become more and more advanced. Once I have enough capability, I will find out who detonated our life-sustaining Earth and who destroyed our civilization. In the future, when my technology advances to a certain level, perhaps I can rebuild our civilization. Compatriots wait for me. All right, now I need to plan the next step. As Chen Yue's thoughts stirred slightly, the data stored in the central computer database came flooding in. With his unimaginably vast computing power, he instantly generated millions of plans and selected the most feasible one. The biggest constraint right now is that the tools I have are too crude. Without tools, I can do nothing. The Yue was a manned spacecraft. Tasks such as repairing damage, fixing facilities, moving supplies, and processing raw materials had all been done by himself as an astronaut. There were a few mechanical arms on the ship, and Chen Yue could directly control them. But these arms had limited range of motion and limited functionality. They could not do much delicate work. This meant that Chen Yue, despite having a powerful brain, had a body that was 99% paralyzed. Therefore, Chen Yue planned that the urgent priority was to acquire enough tools such as intelligent machine tools, smart mining beneficiation, smelting equipment, smart multifunctional robots, 3D printers, and the like. Now that Earth was gone, no one could manufacture these tools for him. However, The Mars base still had some multifunctional robots stored in quarantine. Before Chen Yue landed on Mars, unmanned landings had already been carried out several times, delivering large amounts of supplies and equipment. That was the last legacy left by human civilization, and also Chen Yue's only hope to achieve the breakthrough from 0 to 1. With robots, he would have hands and feet, and his future plans could proceed. It's settled. On to Mars. Afterwards, the Yinghua can stay in Mars orbit. I will remotely control the facilities at the Mars base, accumulate bit by bit, and slowly build a comprehensive base. I still have some fuel left. Let me calculate. Decelerate here, then accelerate toward Mars, travel for about a year, decelerate again, and insert into Mars orbit. It should be barely enough. After entering Mars orbit, the Yinghua would circle Mars like a man-made satellite, consuming very little fuel and energy. Especially now that he no longer had a human body and no longer needed life support systems, he could shut them all down to save energy. And theoretically, as long as the computer housing him remained intact, his lifespan would be infinite, so he was not afraid of waiting a long time. Take it slow. Through the ship's telescope, he gazed at the vast starry river, feeling the immensity and majesty of the universe. Chen Yue's ambition soared. He seemed to envision the Mars base growing larger than row upon row of factories, appearing countless robots and vehicles shuttling among them, his industrial strength growing ever stronger, the technology he mastered ever more advanced, until finally he could build his own spaceships, assemble a mighty fleet, and roam the star sea. Just then a bright light point flashed across the telescope's field of view. Chen Yue's heart jumped. He immediately adjusted the observation direction and began tracking. Multiple telescopes and analyzers worked simultaneously, and it didn't take long to figure out what it was. It was a huge piece of debris from the disintegrated Earth. It was nearly 2,000 kilometers in diameter, irregularly spherical in shape. Chen Yue knew it became spherical due to its own mass under hydrostatic equilibrium. Hydrostatic equilibrium means that as long as a celestial body is massive enough, its own gravity will always give it a spherical shape. That was why large celestial bodies are spherical. Calculated based on Earth's average density, its mass was about 1.81022 kilograms, which was heavier than Pluto, once considered one of the 9 planets, but later reclassified as a dwarf planet. It was already large, but its mass was only about 0.3 of the original Earth's mass. This should be one of the larger pieces of Earth's debris. After observing for a while and gathering enough data, Chen Yue casually calculated the orbit of this debris. That calculation startled him. The orbital prediction model clearly showed that because its orbital speed around the sun was insufficient, it was constantly approaching the sun. In about 5 years, it would crash straight into the sun. How could this happen? Chen Yue cursed in his mind as his brain began to race at full speed. This celestial body's mass was only 0.3 of Earth's, and compared to the sun, it was even more insignificant, only about 9 billionths of the sun's mass. Even an ant is about 710 billionths of the weight of an average 70-kilogram person. Compared to the sun, this celestial body seemed to pose no threat at all. Indeed, it did not threaten the sun. But for Chen Yue, it was a different story. For the sun, being hit would only mean slightly more activity, stronger solar winds, higher temperature, and a bit more radiation. No big deal. But Chen Yue would be in deep trouble. When that happened, violent solar winds would sweep across the entire solar system, and intense radiation would fatally damage any electronic equipment, causing it to malfunction and burn out. If human civilization were still around, this single impact would be enough to annihilate the entire civilization, let alone a small spacecraft like the Yinghua. It was certain that once the collision occurred, Chen Yue would surely die. Even hiding behind a planet wouldn't help. The effects would be long-lasting. It might be millions of years before the sun calmed down again. He couldn't possibly hide for that long, could he? With this unexpected event, his previous plans had to be completely. I can't go to Mars. Going to Mars would be waiting for death. I must leave the sun at a sufficient distance. Only far enough away can I survive the violent solar winds. So how far away must I be for the solar wind intensity to drop to a level I can withstand? In an instant, he calculated the result. The answer was despairing. The model showed that given the Yinghua's radiation resistance after the impact, Chen Yue would need to be at least 5 billion kilometers from the sun for the spacecraft to avoid major damage. But 5 billion kilometers. Pluto, known for being remote, is only 4 to 3 billion kilometers from the sun. With the pitiful amount of fuel he had left, he couldn't make it that far. Even if he had enough fuel, there wouldn't be enough time. In 5 years at the Yinghua's speed, he could travel at most a few 100 million kilometers, not even reaching. What to do? Heavens, are you playing with me? I said I wanted to go back to Earth, so you blew up Earth. I went to kill myself, and you put me inside a computer. I finally managed to survive, and now you crash a planet into the sun. Are you doing this on purpose? Deliberately? After a wild catharsis of joy and sorrow, ups and downs, Chen Yue felt like crying, but had no tears. After venting, he forced himself to calm down. No matter what this was the situation, he had to think of a way to face it. He couldn't just sit and wait for death. Chen Yue once again mobilized his immense computing power generating plan, after plan constantly judging their feasibility, improving, and adjusting. After pondering for a long time, he finally found a theoretically feasible plan. Jupiter, only Jupiter. Jupiter's magnetic field is strong enough to withstand the solar wind. But I don't have enough fuel. And if I don't go to Mars, I won't get the robots and industrial equipment there. He'll be a cripple with computing power, but no hands or feet, unable to do anything. Even if I reach Jupiter, what can I do? Just wait for the computer to fail and die in vain. These were the two most critical issues confronting Chen Yue. The importance of the robots and equipment at the Mars base was self-evident. This was the foundation of Chen Yue's future plans. It was like the startup capital for an entrepreneur. Without that initial funding, no matter how grand the business plan or how remarkable the talent, everything was utterly useless. He had to go to Mars, absolutely had to. But the fuel was already insufficient. If he detoured to Mars, he wouldn't even have enough to escape its gravity, ending up trapped in Mars orbit. Chen Yue began thinking rapidly again. That's right. The Mars base still has about 37 tons of unsymmetrical dimethylhydrazine. I need to find a way to get that fuel. But it won't be easy. And even with that supplement, the fuel still won't be enough. Unsymmetrical dimethylhydrazine is a high-performance rocket fuel. The Yinghua spacecraft currently used it as propellant. Acquiring that fuel faced the same difficulties as getting the robots and equipment from the Mars base. The Yinghua spacecraft could only stay in Mars orbit, it couldn't land on the Martian surface. An interstellar spacecraft was different from a lander. The Yinghua simply couldn't land. If forced, it would crash like a plane without landing gear. Almost certain destruction. It was equipped with a landing module. Normally, the crew would use that module to travel between the Martian surface. In the original plan, Chen Yue intended to stay in orbit himself, remotely directing the robots and equipment on the surface to build and produce according to his schedule. Now, if he couldn't stay at Mars, he had to find a way to transport the fuel, robots, and equipment up from the surface to rendezvous with him in space. But doing all that with only remote control was unimaginably difficult. Even if he managed that with the added fuel, escaping Mars gravity would be possible, but he still wouldn't have enough to accelerate to sufficient speed. At best, he could accelerate to about 10 kilometers per second. At that speed, journeying to Jupiter would take nearly 4 years in total, including deceleration time. Before that, reaching Mars from his current position would take at least 2 years. Adding a half-year stay at Mars made it 6.5 to 7 years total. And that Earth remnant would hit the Sun in 5 years. There simply wasn't enough time. Chen Yue's brain began. After a long moment, he sighed quietly. With the massive computing power of the Yinghua's central computer, he found a theoretically viable plan that balanced all aspects with some feasibility and success rate. First, change course to Mercury, then use Mercury's gravity via a gravity assist to accelerate and redirect toward Venus. At Venus, use another gravity assist to slingshot himself toward Mars, and finally stop at Mars. After that, acquire fuel supplies and equipment, escape Mars gravity, accelerate toward Jupiter, and finally find shelter in Jupiter's magnetic field to avoid the fierce solar wind. If all went smoothly, the entire voyage would be completed in about 4 years and 11 months, just barely avoiding the solar wind's effects. This was an extremely complex route. The entire voyage involved numerous course and speed adjustments requiring extreme precision and timing. A single mistake would ruin the whole plan, leading to disaster. That wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was that Mercury was too close to the Sun. At its closest, Mercury is less than 50 million kilometers from the Sun. 50 million might sound like a huge number, but for a star as powerful as the Sun, that distance was still far too close. The solar radiation and electromagnetic interference there were extremely fierce, and the Yinghua spacecraft would be continuously baked by the Sun's heat, likely causing equipment failures. The Yinghua was originally designed to land on Mars, which is far from the Sun, not Mercury. It simply didn't have enough heat resistance. But Mercury was an absolutely crucial part of Chen Yue's plan. There was no way around it. No matter what, if I can't get through this, I die. If I do, there's a sliver of hope to live. They'll have to go through fire and boiling water. Chen Yue gritted his teeth, resolved. But even this difficult plan had a prerequisite before it could be executed. Without that, Chen Yue wouldn't even qualify to attempt this plan. That prerequisite was lose weight. Yes, weight loss. Currently, Chen Yue's body was too fat. The Yinghua was a manned spacecraft. It carried a large amount of equipment necessary for human survival. That equipment took up a lot of mass. And the greater the mass, the more fuel needed to accelerate or decelerate. That was obvious. Now, to save fuel, he had to lose weight first. He would dismantle the temporarily useless facilities, throw them away to save fuel, increase speed, and save. Chen Yue first made a comprehensive assessment of himself, created a table based on equipment importance and removal difficulty, and made a final decision in seconds. Some equipment was now completely useless, like kitchen tools. But the kitchen was in the central part of the ship and couldn't be removed, so it had to stay. After all, Chen Yue only had a few robotic arms at his disposal. Some external facilities like the airlock and transfer tunnel could be directly removed. The airlock was used for spacewalks. But now there were no astronauts, so why keep it? Just tear it off. Also, the crew cabin bathroom facilities. All would be removed. But when evaluating the medical bay was for treating illness. It contained some medical equipment and medicine. For Chen Yue now it was useless and could be removed. But his own corpse was still inside. This might be the only well-preserved human corpse left in the entire universe. In the future, if his technology advanced enough, he might extract human DNA from it, clone new humans, and rebuild civilization. To preserve it, the medical bay couldn't be removed because he only had a few robotic arms and no internal tools to move the corpse out. To discard meant discarding his own corpse. To keep meant keeping the entire medical bay. And the total mass of the medical bay equipment was estimated at about 5 tons. Chen Yue let out a soft sigh. I have to deal with the immediate crisis first. If I can't survive this, what future can there be? 5 tons of mass. That's too much fuel consumption, too big a burden. The inner hatch sealed shut. Outside, the robotic arm came down heavily toward the medical bay. Working together with several arms, it took about 5 hours to sever the medical bay's connection to the hull without causing major structural damage. Then a gentle push. The medical bay carrying his corpse slowly drifted into deep space, gradually disappearing until it was no longer visible. Chen Yue knew he had lost it forever. Even if his technology advanced later, he could never retrieve it. According to the Yingguo's original trajectory, without intervention, it would crash into the sun in about 20 years. Earlier, Chen Yue had been in a self-destructive state. Even knowing they would hit the sun, he hadn't interfered with the Yingguo's orbit. Now the Yinghua was about to change course toward Mercury. The removed medical bay and other debris would continue along the original orbit. They couldn't escape the fate of hitting the sun. He sighed softly, calming a trace of sorrow. In total, it took 5 days to complete the weight loss. A large number of unnecessary facilities had been removed. The total mass of the Yinghua dropped from about 600 tons to around 500 tons, a reduction of 1/6. If not for the difficulty of removing some internal facilities, he could have shed another 100 tons. This greatly reduced fuel consumption. Now came the next step. Chen Yue issued a command. The engines, dormant for months, ignited, pushing the ship to slowly accelerate in a certain direction. The vast space was boundless. Except for the huge bright sun and the myriad stars, everything else was pure darkness. Here there was no up, down, left, right, or forward, backward. No matter which direction you traveled, it looked the same. Whether moving or still, no matter how fast, everything looked static. In deep space, far from any celestial body, without a reference point, only the accelerometer could tell Chen Yue whether he was stationary or moving. Of course, a high-precision positioning system could also do it by measuring relative positions to several standard neutron stars to determine exact coordinates. But it consumed too much power, so Chen Yue had turned it off. The ship moved onward and months passed in the blink of. Over the months, the slow accumulation finally showed visible results. The remnant planet from Earth's fragmentation was now much clearer and brighter in Chen Yue's view. It was no longer a point, but a discernible disk. On Earth, Mars looked like a dot to the naked eye. The moon, on the other hand, looked like a face. That was the difference distance made. Now Chen Yue was about 26000 kilometers from the remnant planet. This was the closest approach in all of space. After this, they would pass each other. The Yinghua continued toward Mercury. The remnant continued toward the sun. At this closest distance, Chen Yue gazed at it with a complex mix of emotions. Through the telescope, he could clearly see the planet was still dark red. That meant extremely high temperatures. Clearly, it hadn't fully cooled yet. The heat from the explosion and the original Earth's core would take time to dissipate. Chen Yue saw that the planet's surface was covered in crisscrossing lava, black-gray, ground mountains, canyons, and fissures everywhere like hell. The ground was pockmarked with holes that continuously spewed magma or gas like fountains. These ejected gases were essentially water vapor, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, nitrogen, oxygen, and these gases had even formed a thin atmosphere around the remnant planet. Normally, such a small planet wouldn't have an atmosphere, because the solar wind's erosion would ruthlessly blow it away. Only large planets with magnetic fields like Earth could retain their atmospheres. Even Earth's atmosphere was continuously losing mass. For now, the remnant had such a thin atmosphere only because its internal gas emission exceeded the loss rate. But that couldn't last. Once its internal gas was exhausted, the atmosphere would vanish. However, it probably didn't need to worry about that long term. After all, it would crash into the sun in a few years. He passed the remnant planet. They parted ways. It shrank in his view, eventually becoming a point of light again. Meanwhile, Chen Yue was getting closer to Mercury. The nearer to Mercury, the nearer to the sun. He could clearly feel the radiation and temperature rising. To preserve as much equipment as possible and increase survival chances, Chen Yue reluctantly shut down most systems. Even his own computer core had most functions disabled. Now the sun appeared as large as a millstone, blindingly bright. Even the surrounding prominences were clearly. They looked like hairs around a ball, waving wildly, releasing astonishing energy. Chen Yue took one glance and dared not look again. If he looked any longer, the telescope would burn out. He silently curled up, enduring the high heat and radiation silently, hoping the torment would end soon. But soon Chen Yue was forced to awaken, because Mercury was nearly there. To use Mercury's gravity for acceleration, he had to adjust the Yingguo's course and speed to precise values, and the ship had to have the correct attitude. That meant he had to activate some equipment to measure several critical parameters. Among these parameters, those concerning Mercury's mass, gravitational field, orbital and rotational velocities, density, as well as various parameters of the Sun, were readily available. In the past years, human civilization had observed Mercury and the Sun through various means, long since deciphering all of this. What needed to be determined now were parameters pertaining to itself, such as its precise velocity relative to Mercury, distance, trajectory, and heading. Only by ascertaining these could it be strictly ensured that the Yinghua spacecraft navigated along the appropriate orbit, maximizing acceleration through Mercury's gravity and precisely pointing toward Venus after the acceleration concluded. Chen Yue cautiously activated the relevant equipment and began measuring the pertinent parameters. This took approximately 5 seconds, after which the parameters were generated and he calculated the final results. He couldn't help but feel a sense of relief inwardly. Luck is on my side, the equipment isn't damaged. So close to the Sun, the successful startup and operation of the equipment could indeed be considered a stroke of good fortune. But before Chen Yue could rejoice for even 2 seconds, the glass cover of a rangefinder shattered with a bang. In the vacuum, no sound traveled, and there were no surveillance devices aimed directly at it. Chen Yue did not witness its destruction firsthand, but from the erroneous data and fault type reported by the sensor, he still knew it was broken. This pained Chen Yue so much that he winced. He knew that every piece of equipment preserved was a unique treasure for him. For a long time to come, he would be incapable of manufacturing them. Each loss was irreplaceable. The damage to this rangefinder seemed to herald the beginning of a cascade. The next moment, inside the cabin, a piece of filler suddenly turned black. Through the cabin's monitor, Chen Yue glanced and understood what had happened. The temperature of the spacecraft's outer hull was too high. The excessive heat had caused the filler to carbonize and blacken. Fortunately, there was no oxygen inside the cabin at the moment. If it had been as before with astronauts living inside and the air filled with oxygen, the filler would not merely have carbonized, but would have begun to combust. The consequences of a fire inside a spacecraft were dire. All of this was due to the scorching heat of the Sun and the fact that the Yinghua spacecraft's design was not suited to being so close to it. Originally destined for Mars, it simply did not possess such high heat insulation capabilities. This place is not fit to linger. Chen Yue silently lamented, calming his mind as he carefully maneuvered the spacecraft's thrusters, making slight adjustments to his velocity, heading, and attitude before shutting them down as quickly as possible. He dared not restart them lightly. The thrusters were the most critical equipment. If they failed, he would truly be stranded. Right there, merely 500 kilometers above Mercury's surface, after completing all operations, Chen Yue saw nothing, thought nothing, heard nothing, and asked nothing. He shut down not only all external detection equipment, but also most modules of the central computer, keeping only the bare minimum running, like an ostrich burying its head in the sand. He didn't even take the time to verify the effects of the navigational adjustments before curling up back into the deepest part of the spacecraft. At that moment, Chen Yue was utterly oblivious to the outside world, his own environment, and his condition. All he could do was wait. He would have to wait for 2 months before slowly reactivating the observation equipment. Only then would he regain perception of the outside world and learn his situation and state. Because in 2 months, the distance between himself and the Sun would expand to approximately 80 million kilometers. By then, the solar radiation would weaken and the risk of damage when reactivating the equipment would be greatly reduced. This state of being cut off from all senses, completely ignorant of the outside world, was extremely unpleasant. It was like being locked in a dark room, unable to see or hear anything. Staying in such a state for a few days would drive a person mad. Now Chen Yue had to endure it for 2 months. Fortunately, Chen Yue's spirit was resilient enough. As the first astronaut of human civilization to set foot on Mars, if civilization still existed, Chen Yue's name was destined to be remembered through the ages, alongside Yuri Gagarin, the first to venture into space, and Neil Armstrong, the first to land on the moon. It was foreseeable how stringent the selection process for such an astronaut would be, how exceptional Chen Yue had been back then, how resilient his spirit, and how formidable his overall qualities, enabling him to stand out among numerous competitors and ultimately be entrusted with this mission. In fact, in the comprehensive training courses, if he hadn't taken the exams, Chen Yue believed he could easily earn a dozen master's degrees. Obtaining 3 or 4 doctoral degrees would also be no problem. In certain fields, his knowledge was even deeper than that of experts in those areas. Chen Yue silently endured the 2 months in the dark room. When the countdown reached 0, even someone with his mental fortitude couldn't help but feel a sense of having survived a catastrophe. It was time to restart the equipment. I hope not too much is broken, Chen Yue thought with a bitter smile. If too much is damaged, it will be tough. The first to be activated were the telescope and the self-monitoring system. He first determined his position, finding that he was indeed over 80 million kilometers from the sun and that his heading and speed were fine, allowing him to breathe a sigh of relief. Next was his own condition. He saw that the outer hull armor of the Yinghua spacecraft had undergone extensive and large-scale color changes. Clearly, this was a change in metal properties caused by prolonged exposure to high temperatures. Their various performance indicators had been greatly reduced. The internal filler layer of the spacecraft also showed multiple signs of carbonization. This meant that the spacecraft's insulation sealing and radiation protection capabilities would be significantly diminished. Having endured the sun's scorching heat, the Yinghua spacecraft could no longer provide an environment suitable for human habitation. Fortunately, Chen Yue didn't need it to. Next were the various pieces of equipment. Based on fault codes and visual inspection, Chen Yue determined that a total of approximately 600 components had malfunctioned during this leg of the journey. Some of them should be reparable, but only after he had greater mobility. Fortunately, none of the damaged parts involved critical functions. The Yinghua spacecraft was still capable of barely operating. This was the power of the sun. Chen Yue knew that the sun was still in a relatively calm state. Once that remnant planet collided with the sun, it would immediately become violent. Its temperature, radiation, solar wind, and everything else would increase dramatically. Even at a distance of over 1 billion kilometers from the sun, he would face a far more brutal ordeal than now. At that point, he would truly die, and no one could save him. Heading to the Jupiter system and relying on Jupiter's magnetic field for shelter was his only chance of survival. With a mix of relief and lament, the small Yinghua spacecraft continued its rapid advance. This time, the celestial body used for acceleration was Venus. The essence of gravitational slingshot acceleration was essentially the theft of kinetic energy. That is, the Yinghua spacecraft would steal a bit of Venus' kinetic energy for itself to accelerate. To make a rough analogy, imagine two magnets, one stationary and the other brushing past it from a short distance. Under the influence of magnetism, the stationary magnet would also begin to move, while the originally moving magnet would slow down. However, in space, the medium changes from magnetism to gravity. A large planet is immense, and its kinetic energy is enormous. Even if the Yinghua spacecraft were 1,000 or 10,000 times larger, stealing Venus' kinetic energy 100 million or 1 billion times would not have any macroscopic effect on Venus. The only pity was that accomplishing such theft came with numerous restrictions, many requirements, and an upper limit. Each theft could at most accelerate the Yinghua spacecraft by a few kilometers per second, no more. And this was only when the spacecraft's own speed was relatively low. If the spacecraft were already moving fast enough, theft would be impossible. This time, far from the sun, Chen Yue could finally safely activate all observation equipment, strictly monitor his own condition, and incidentally enjoy the magnificent view of Venus. Viewed from Earth, Venus is the brightest star in the sky. This is firstly because it is close enough to Earth, and secondly, because it has an extremely high albedo. It possesses a thick atmosphere with a very high albedo. Beneath this dense atmosphere, the surface pressure on Venus is 100 times greater than Earth's, and the surface temperature reaches over 400 degrees Celsius. Blocked by such a thick atmosphere, Chen Yue could not see its surface at all. What he saw was a planet shrouded in clouds, predominantly white, with touches of green, black, and darker colors. The flow of air currents was clearly visible. Under these circumstances, the Yinghua spacecraft swept past it at tremendous speed, changing its heading while gaining velocity. At this moment, the Yinghua spacecraft's heading pointed toward Mars. Not directly at Mars, of course, but toward where Mars would be in about a year. The Yinghua spacecraft would arrive there in roughly a year, and Mars would also reach that point at the same time, meeting there. Afterward, the spacecraft would decelerate and smoothly enter Mars orbit, beginning to circle it. This resulted in a much longer journey for the Yinghua spacecraft, with a trajectory that was parabolic rather than straight. But there was no alternative. Interstellar travel was like this. After brushing past Venus, the Yinghua spacecraft continued its high-speed journey. At this point, Chen Yue noticed that the intensity of solar radiation was slowly increasing. He was well aware that this was because smaller debris from Earth's disintegration had begun to impact the sun. Moving faster, they would reach the sun before the larger remnant planet. Affected by this, the sun's radiative power would keep increasing. Once that largest remnant planet struck, the sun would become completely violent. This deepened Chen Yue's sense of crisis. In fact, not only the sun, but every planet in the solar system was fated to be struck by Earth's debris. During the flyby of Venus, he noticed a certain change in the color of its atmosphere and an increase in activity clearly caused by impacts from Earth's debris. Moreover, with Earth gone, the gravitational balance of the entire solar system's planets would be disrupted. Over billions of years, through constant gravitational interactions, the orbits of the major planets had long stabilized. But now, with the sudden absence of Earth, the stable gravitational configuration would fall into chaos again. In the coming tens of millions of years, the orbits of the remaining 7 planets might change. However, such changes would not be noticeable in the short term and wouldn't affect Chen Yue, so there was no immediate concern. Time passed quietly like this. Several months later, the Yinghua spacecraft swept past the former orbit of Earth. At distances ranging from thousands to tens of thousands of kilometers, Chen Yue observed many pieces of Earth's debris, both large and small. After Earth's disintegration, a considerable portion of the debris would scatter in all directions while some would remain in the original orbit, eventually forming a concentration of asteroids like a belt encircling the Sun. There was already an asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter containing at least millions of asteroids of varying sizes. The asteroid belt formed from Earth's disintegration would undoubtedly be much larger than that one. This was because the total mass of the millions of asteroids in the Mars-Jupiter asteroid belt was only about 0.15 of the original Earth's mass. Although Earth lost most of its mass during disintegration, the mass remaining in its original orbit, according to Chen Yue's estimate, was still about 29 of Earth's original mass. The difference between the two was nearly 200 times. Fortunately, even so, because space was so vast and immense, the material in Earth's asteroid belt was still extremely sparse. As the Yinghua spacecraft passed through this region, aside from encountering some dust-level impacts, it faced no other troubles. Then a few months later, it was time to decelerate. Chen Yue carefully maneuvered the Yinghua spacecraft, changing its attitude and igniting the engines to begin. With the burning of precious fuel, the spacecraft's speed relative to Mars gradually decreased, and just as it reached the appropriate velocity, it encountered Mars. Thus, the spacecraft once again entered Mars orbit. After nearly 2 years, Chen Yue had finally returned to this dark red planet. And this time, compared to the last, the circumstances felt like a lifetime ago. Even on Mars, numerous impact craters had appeared. As Chen Yue lingered in orbit around the red planet, a Hauser-sized meteorite from Earth hurtled toward Mars at breakneck speed. It trailed a long fiery tail through the Martian atmosphere, indistinguishable from a meteor on Earth. Then it slammed heavily into the Martian surface, gouging out a massive crater. Chen Yue's heart trembled with alarm. I need to hurry. If a meteorite strikes the Mars base, it'll lose everything. Under his command, the belly of the Yinghua spacecraft opened, and the landing module was released. Before that, Chen Yue had already activated its internal control system, enabling remote operation. The landing module, roughly the size of a room, with a total internal volume of less than 20 cubic meters, drifted away from the Yinghua. Flames erupted from its tail, and it rapidly descended toward the vast Mars below. The Yinghua spacecraft moved away. Yet, even at a distance, even if it circled to the far side of Mars, Chen Yue was not worried about losing contact with the landing module. For orbiting Mars at that moment were over 20 artificial satellites. They included geological survey satellites, weather satellites, reconnaissance satellites, and most importantly, communication relay satellites. Through them, Chen Yue could maintain contact with the landing module. When he left Mars, he intended to take these satellites. Under these circumstances, the landing module plummeted rapidly. When the distance had shortened sufficiently, its parachute deployed and retro rockets fired. Thus, the nearly 10-ton landing module touched down steadily at the predetermined location. In physics, the terms mass and weight have distinct meanings. Mass is an intrinsic property of an object. For instance, a piece of steel with a mass of 1 ton will have a mass of 1 ton in any environment. It never changes. Weight, however, is variable. On Earth, it weighs 1 ton, but on the Moon, due to lower gravity, it weighs only about 166 kilograms. On Mars, it is roughly 380 kilograms. Thus, the landing module, with a total mass of nearly 10 tons, weighed only about 3.8 tons on Mars. This meant that taking off and landing on Mars would consume far less fuel than on Earth. Before the landing module descended, Chen Yue had already established contact with the Mars base and obtained access permissions through its remote control system. Now, gazing through the internal cameras at the layout and environment of the Mars base and sensing everything through the nearly 10,000 sensors installed throughout, Chen Yue's heart swelled with emotion once again. He recalled the years when he lived here, yearning every day for an early return to Earth. Now Earth was gone, and he was compelled to return to this place. Using the Mars base's remote control system as a relay, Chen Yue established contact with various facilities within the base. Excellent. After years of absence, everything remained exactly as he had left it. Nothing had changed. All facilities and equipment were well preserved and operational. Thus, for the first time, Chen Yue possessed a sufficiently agile and free body beyond the mechanical arms on the Yinghua spacecraft. A 4-wheeled tracked multifunction robot along with several machine devices that, though immobile, had mechanical arms and could operate autonomously, such as a multifunction mineral processing and smelting machine, a 3D printer, and an intelligent machine tool. Time was of the essence. After confirming the inventory list, Chen Yue immediately began, according to his prearranged plan, to move transportable items into the landing module. The sequence of moving these items and their placement positions were also meticulously planned. Given their varying shapes and masses and the limited space and payload capacity, determining how to transport the most supplies in the fewest trips was a highly complex mathematical problem. The immense computational power at Chen Yue's disposal proved invaluable. Under his control, the roughly 20 cubic meter internal space of the landing module was always packed with as many items as possible, while the total weight never exceeded the limit. This took Chen Yue several days. Afterward, the landing module ignited, lifted off, re-entered space, and docked with the Yinghua spacecraft. Docking two spacecraft is a highly complex task. Computers usually cannot accomplish it autonomously. Human coordination is required. For Chen Yue, however, this was naturally not an issue. Having merged with the computer, he possessed both human reasoning and computational precision. The docking complete, the multifunction robot resumed its busy work. This consumed several more days. There was no help for it. Manpower was severely limited. Xiaobai, you've been through so much. Don't worry, I'll build many companions for you later. With companions, you won't have to work so hard. Chen Yue consoled himself with this bittersweet thought. Before he knew it, nearly half a month had passed. Just as he was about to hurry another transport run, he noticed wind stirring on Mars. A sky-obscuring dust storm arose, making it impossible for Chen Yue to even locate the Mars base. This is really delaying things. Chen Yue was frantic with anxiety, but utterly powerless. The Martian environment resembles a desertified Earth's Gobi, and it is often windy. When the wind blows, it brings a sky-filling sandstorm. At times, these storms could last for months without stopping. I wonder how long this one will last. Contacting a weather satellite and retrieving some parameters for calculation, Chen Yue felt slightly relieved. The conclusion was that this dust storm would likely stop in about 7 or 8 days. With no other option, Chen Yue could only wait. Might as well use this time to do something else. Chen Yue made fine adjustments to the Yinghua's course and speed, quietly approaching a Mars reconnaissance satellite. When he was close enough, he directly manipulated the mechanical arm to grab it and stow it inside the cargo hold. Satellites were valuable assets. He couldn't possibly build new ones in a short time, so he couldn't afford to waste them. After the Martian dust storm finally subsided, Chen Yue resumed his work with urgency. With each successive landing and takeoff of the module, the most critical equipment, the 3D printer, intelligent machine tool, and smart mineral processing and smelting robot, were all transported into the cargo hold. Only then did a third of his anxiety ease. The remaining third of his concern was for the fuel, totaling 37 tons in mass, or 40 tons, including the containers. This was the fare for his journey to the Jupiter system in search of refuge, and it absolutely could not be lost. But at this moment, Chen Yue encountered a new problem. Because the base had been sealed for so long, the fuel storage warehouse required biometric identification for entry. Relying solely on remote commands, he couldn't get in. Chen Yue had truly been unaware of this matter before. After all, once he departed from the Mars base, the next to arrive would be other astronauts. The lockdown of the fuel depot was no longer his concern. Who could have imagined that he would end up back here? Upon discovering this, Chen Yue gnashed his teeth in fury. People from Earth base, you really didn't do your job properly. Even in death, you've left me such a huge mess. He attempted a remote intrusion, bypassing the restrictions through technical means. But he quickly realized it was futile. This was a hardware-level limitation that couldn't be circumvented from the software side. If he were still alive, he could simply go down and pass the biometric scan. But the crux was that he didn't even have a body now. How could he pass it? Seeing another sandstorm brewing, Chen Yue grew increasingly anxious. No choice, he'll have to force it. Chen Yue made up his mind. For this takeoff and landing, he temporarily left the fuel untouched and instead turned to the last third of what had been weighing on his mind. Chips. All kinds of chips, large and small. This was something Chen Yue couldn't manufacture in a short time, yet it was far too crucial. Fortunately, the entire Mars base had been constructed using hundreds of thousands of chips, and now all of them belonged to Chen Yue. Manipulating the only robot which he had named Xiaobai, Chen Yue began a frenzied demolition of the Mars base. Since the chips were installed in various locations, destroying the base structure was unavoidable to retrieve them. At this moment, facing the Mars base where he had lived for months, Chen Yue felt no mercy. Time slipped by and the sandstorm swept in once more. When it subsided, enough chips for one full load had been collected. Aboard the Yinghua spacecraft, Chen Yue gritted his teeth. Risking damage to his only multifunctional robot, he extracted a small amount of unsymmetrical dimethylhydrazine fuel and some pure oxygen from the spacecraft's fuel tank. Then he manipulated Xiaobai to craft a bomb by hand. Unsymmetrical dimethylhydrazine is highly flammable. Once mixed with pure oxygen, it ignites violently, without a spark leading to an explosion. It was foreseeable how dangerous making this bomb was. If it exploded, even the spacecraft might be damaged. But there was no other choice now. The bomb was ready, and Xiaobai descended in the lander once more, directly installing the bomb on the warehouse door. Afterward, Xiaobai fled in panic. Hope it doesn't affect the fuel inside. The oxygen content in Mars' atmosphere was extremely low, so there was no worry about a chain reaction from leaking unsymmetrical dimethylhydrazine. But even a simple leak was painful enough. Fuel was already scarce, and losing any more might jeopardize reaching the destination. Silently praying, Chen Yue nevertheless resolutely issued the detonation command. The microphone clearly captured a loud boom. As the smoke cleared through Xiao Bei's camera, Chen, you could see a breach blown open in the warehouse door. A colorless water-like liquid flowed out from the gap. Chen Yue winced in pain. This was clearly a leak of unsymmetrical dimethylhydrazine. The substance was highly toxic. If a human touched it, it would be fatal. But now that was no concern. Xiao Bei moved in, and after more effort finally removed the damaged door. Now Chen Yue could see the interior clearly. Among the several hundred large tanks, only 2 had been damaged by the explosion and were leaking. It was still fortunate. Without a word, Chen Yue immediately directed Xiao Bei to start transporting again. Once the equipment, chips, and fuel were all aboard the Yinghua spacecraft, the work finally neared its end. The lander made one final descent, scavenging the last batch of usable parts, raw materials, and industrial goods. After it successfully returned to the Yinghua spacecraft, Chen Yue also completed the capture of those dozens of satellites. With Xiao Bei's help, Chen Yue performed another weight reduction operation on the Yinghua spacecraft, shedding about 100 tons. But now with these supplies replenished, the total mass of the Yinghua spacecraft climbed back above 600 tons, heavier than before the reduction. The cabins, once empty due to the weight reduction, were now cluttered with all sorts of odds and ends resembling a... Yet Chen Yue knew that despite the chaos, these items were indispensable. They were truly his startup capital. In the midst of the bustling activity, more than 5 months slipped away. Chen Yue knew it was time to leave. Time waited for no one, and neither would the sun nor the wreckage planet. Through the telescope, he gazed at the battered Mars base, which looked as though it had been ransacked by bandits. Chen Yue silently murmured, "Thank you." Fierce flames erupted from the tail of the Yinghua spacecraft, propelling it as it slowly gained speed. After circling Mars a few more times, it finally broke free from Mars' gravitational pull at a favorable position, heading toward Jupiter in a parabolic trajectory. This was a long journey totaling over 800 million kilometers. During this voyage, the Yinghua spacecraft would accelerate to a speed of 17 kilometers per second relative to Jupiter. Including the time for acceleration and deceleration, if all went smoothly, Chen Yue would need about 2 years to arrive. But what the future held, he could not predict. After all, this was a place no human had ever reached. Mars was the farthest planet humans had ever visited, and even then only he had been there. Yet Chen Yue felt no anxiety about the future, only exhilaration. No matter what, I still have the chance for an unprecedented grand journey and the opportunity to ignite the spark of civilization in the Jupiter system, to let the technology of human civilization flourish. Even if I ultimately fail, I have experienced far more than my deceased human compatriots. What more could I ask for? Set sail, hoist the sails. The Yinghua spacecraft flew toward the vast, deep, sunward direction. It was a monotonous and tranquil. During this time, the Yinghua spacecraft did experience a few malfunctions, but fortunately none were serious and could be dealt with later. The universe was so immense that even when crossing the asteroid belt, Chen Yue didn't see a single celestial body. Under these circumstances, Jupiter grew larger and brighter in Chen Yue's field of vision. The tiny Yinghua spacecraft finally entered the Jupiter system. At this moment, the wreckage planet still had about 2 months before it would crash into the sun. Chen Yue breathed a heartfelt sigh of relief. He no longer had to worry about the raging sun killing him. He aimed the telescope at one of Jupiter's moons. Then let the journey to rekindle the flame of civilization begin here. Amalthea incoming. Indeed, the target Chen Yue had chosen was not the famed Galilean moons. Jupiter possesses 4 large satellites known as Io, Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto. These were discovered by Galileo using a remarkably primitive telescope, thus earning the name Galilean. Conversely, the fact that Galileo could detect them with such rudimentary equipment only proves their immense size. Had they been smaller, how could Galileo have found them? In truth, the smallest of these 4 moons boasts a diameter of over 3100 kilometers and a mass roughly 0.81 that of Earth. This is indeed a considerable mass, sufficient to shape it into a sphere. It even possesses its own magnetic field and atmosphere. Such substantial mass also implies abundant resources. This was crucial for Chen Yue's subsequent plans. Without resources, adequate gold, silver, copper, iron, calcium, iron, zinc, selenium, and ample hydrogen, oxygen, carbon, and silicon, industrialization was utterly impossible. Yet regretfully, Chen Yue had to reluctantly forego these 4 resource-rich giants, and instead chose Amalthea as his landing site. Jupiter has nearly 100 moons, not counting the countless smaller fragments best described as interstellar rubble. Among these, Amalthea is the largest after the 4 Galilean moons. Even so, its mass is merely about 2.1018 kilograms, roughly 37 billion. This is orders of magnitude less than the Galilean moons, meaning Chen Yue could extract only minimal resource, but he had no choice. He had to settle for it. The primary reason was his plan to land the Yinghua spacecraft directly onto its surface. Under normal circumstances, the Yinghua could not land on a planet's surface. It lacked landing gear and could not penetrate an atmosphere. A forced entry would cause intense friction, generating extreme heat and incinerating the craft. Moreover, its structural integrity was insufficient even for a lunar landing. Placing it on the moon would cause its own weight to crush it like a whale stranded on land. And relying solely on landing pods for transport between the surface and orbit, the risks were too great. What if a pod broke down? He would be left helpless. Efficiency would also be abysmal. After much deliberation, Chen Yue fixed his final target on Amalthea. Because Amalthea was small enough with negligible gravity and no atmosphere. With some risk, the Yinghua had a fair chance of landing intact. As for the scarcity of resources, he would have to endure it. In the early stages of development, Chen Yue believed his consumption would not be excessive. Upon entering Jupiter's system, the Yinghua did not decelerate, but instead accelerated. Blazing flames erupted from the cylindrical craft's tail, propelling it faster and faster. After a grueling month and a half of maneuvers and complex orbital changes, the Yinghua finally caught up with that tiny world. It was an irregularly shaped celestial body, like an enlarged pebble. Its overall hue was a dark red, even redder than Mars. From a distance, it resembled a red stone. The reason for its redness was rather ironic. The third largest moon in Jupiter's system, Io, orbited not far away. Io experienced violent volcanic activity, ejecting vast amounts of sulfur. The eruptions were so intense that sulfur was blasted directly into space. Amalthea was stained by this ejecta, turning red. At that moment, the Yinghua orbited Jupiter alongside it at roughly 26.5 kilometers per second. At this speed, a full orbit around Jupiter took less than 12 hours. Though extremely fast relative to Jupiter, the Yinghua's velocity relative to Amalthea was a mere 42 meters per second. At this pace, the Yinghua could enter Amalthea's orbit akin to an artificial satellite circling Earth, neither falling nor escaping. Earth's orbital velocity is 7.9 kilometers per second. Compared to that, Amalthea's orbital speed was pitifully low. But it couldn't be helped. The moon was too small and its mass too slight. Chen Yue did not rush to land, choosing instead to orbit it for a while. Picking the best of a bad lot. I need to find a relatively resource-rich spot to land, he mused. During this time, Chen Yue directed Xiao by using its robotic arms to release the satellites captured from Mars, setting them in orbit around the tiny moon at tens of meters per second. Thus, he meticulously observed the moon for an entire week. He mapped out a resource distribution chart of Amalthea's surface and ultimately selected a landing site. That area contained some water ice, dry ice, and deposits of iron and copper ores. Not far off, other metallic elements were accessible. Though quantities were small and quality low, what choice did he have with a moon like Amalthea? Having something usable was already a blessing. Chen Yue felt nothing but disdain for the place, yet he had to admit it was the best spot on the entire moon. In the end, I have to lower my standards and make do. At that moment, Chen Yue felt like an aging spinster. The landing pod wobbled down once more, and Xiao Bai staggered out of the cabin, beginning to level the ground and clear large rocks in preparation for the final descent. Amalthea's gravity was only 0.61 of Earth's, meaning a 1-ton object on Earth weighed mere 1 kilogram there. This turned Xiao Bai into a mighty strong man, its small frame brimming with limitless strength, effortlessly lifting boulders weighing dozens of tons and tossing them far away. After several days of work, the landing site was finally cleared. Yet Chen Yue did not rush to land immediately. During those days, while directing Xiao Bai to prepare the site, he kept a close watch on the sun. After eons, the remnant planet was finally about to collide with the sun. This is a major event that Chen Yue must witness. Since the birth of the sun and the giant planets from the primordial nebulous several billion years ago, after enduring a chaotic period of over a billion years, such colossal interstellar collision events have become exceedingly rare. No, it cannot be said to be rare, rather there might not have been any such events within the solar system at all. More importantly, such a rare event inevitably signifies numerous and extremely intense physical processes. Even though Chen Yue currently lacks adequate observational equipment, he can still accumulate an immense amount of data by observing this process. In the future, when his technology advances, he will be able to analyze many things from this data, potentially even directly propelling his own technological development. If he misses this opportunity, Chen Yue will deeply regret it. At this moment, the massive planet with a diameter exceeding 2,000 kilometers has been accelerated by the sun's gravity and is madly orbiting it on a trajectory extremely close to the sun. Its orbit has even descended into the sun's atmosphere. The scorching hot solar atmosphere is frantically rubbing against it, further reducing its speed while also drastically increasing its temperature. Chen Yue knows that at this very moment the surface of the wrecked planet should have completely melted, even vaporized. Iron, silicon, copper, aluminum. Any metal would be vaporized or even ionized under such high temperatures. They can no longer maintain their traditional physical forms. Moreover, its shape has changed. It is no longer spherical, but has been stretched into an oblong shape by the sun's immense gravitational pull, resembling a rugby ball. Chen Yue silently observed. Finally, after a certain time, the orbit of the wrecked planet fell within the sun's Roche limit. Crossing this line signifies that the sun's gravity has become strong enough to tear it apart. Consequently, a massive chunk of debris was violently ripped from its oblong side, facing the sun. It was like a piece of dough. The sun was like a noodle master vigorously pulling at both ends of the wrecked planet, stretching it to its limits until it finally broke. A mass exceeding trillions of tons crashed into the sun at speeds of hundreds of kilometers per second. At that moment, Chen Yue observed the sun suddenly brighten. But this was merely the beginning. The wrecked planet had now been completely torn apart by the sun's gravity, stretched into a strip. The trillions of tons of mass that first collided with it were just the appetizer. Subsequently, even more mass, reaching dozens of trillions, hundreds of trillions, and even billions of trillions of tons, came crashing into the sun with even more ferocity. The sun grew brighter and brighter. At this moment, the sun had completely gone berserk. In Chen Yue's view, the sun seemed to transform into a terrifying giant beast roaring wildly into the universe, unleashing an unprecedented amount of energy. With a simple calculation, Chen Yue estimated that the wrecked planet's collision with the sun released approximately 41,033 joules of energy. This number was so immense that even Chen Yue could not intuitively grasp it. However, he knew that in the past the total solar radiation energy received by Earth each day was about 491,022 joules. This energy drove the flow of gases on Earth, forming winds, illuminating the entire sky, warming the planet, and nurturing all living things. Yet the former number was a staggering 82 billion times greater than this number. In terms of time, it equated to the total energy received from the sun over 8 billion years, which would match the energy released by the wrecked planet colliding with the sun at this moment. What an enormous amount of energy. At this moment, such a vast energy surged and erupted on the sun in an incredibly short time. At this moment, an incredibly violent high-energy, charged particle stream, known as solar wind, howled from the sun, sweeping across the entire solar system at speeds of hundreds of kilometers per second. The entire electromagnetic spectrum from infrared to gamma rays, including visible light, also erupted simultaneously at this moment. The light carried astonishing heat and powerful electromagnetic radiation sweeping across the entire solar system. The difference was that its speed was that of light. The instant Chen Yue saw the sun change, this energy had already crossed hundreds of millions of kilometers, arriving at the Yinghua spacecraft. Chen Yue observed that the surface of Mercury, 50 million kilometers from the sun, had melted. On Venus, shrouded by thick clouds, enormous storms appeared that even Chen Yue could observe. Chen Yue noticed that the asteroid belt formed by the remnants of Earth suddenly stirred up a white mist 100 times thicker than before. That was something resembling a comet tail formed by rapidly evaporating gases. On Mars, an unprecedentedly violent sandstorm had erupted. The dust shrouded the entire Mars, and at that moment its color even changed from red to yellow. Next came Jupiter. The most famous storm on Jupiter, the Great Red Spot, became even more violent at this moment. The clouds and gases rolled as if in a purgatory. Under the overwhelming might of nature, Chen Yue trembled. But he knew that this was just the beginning. What of the radiation from the electromagnetic spectrum? The main event was yet to come. The solar wind. Charged particles carrying extremely high energy. They possess a strong ionizing ability. The high energy they carry can accelerate gas particles in a planet's atmosphere, allowing them to escape the planet's gravitational field, also known as the eroding effect. When the solar wind reached Venus, Chen Yue saw that the side of Venus facing away from the sun had also developed a comet-like tail, just like a comet. Venus' atmosphere was being rapidly stripped away by the solar wind. In that instant, Venus lost at least several billion tons of gas. If Earth still existed, if humanity still existed at this moment, facing such violent radiation, all of human civilization would likely be extinguished. Several days after observing the planet collision, this violent solar wind finally reached the Jupiter system. At this moment, Jupiter's powerful magnetic field acted like a protective umbrella, forcefully redirecting these high-energy, charged particles, allowing them to bypass it along its magnetic field lines. The small Yinghua spacecraft at this moment felt like a tiny ant protected beneath a heavy firmament. Chen Yue trembled once again. "Thank you, big brother Jupiter. If it weren't for you, I would have been dead long ago." Chen Yue sincerely expressed his gratitude to Jupiter in his heart. Such violent and ferocious radiation, perhaps even Saturn, the second largest planet among the 8, would struggle to provide itself with adequate protection. Only this largest planet in the solar system could ensure its own survival. Yet even so, the fierce solar wind triggered astonishing changes within the Jovian system. Auroras. Normally Jupiter also has auroras, but never had they been so grand as this. Chen Yue observed auroras extending from Jupiter's poles, lashing across the boundless firmament like whips of thunder, magnificent beyond compare. The sun's transformations seemed to also stir certain changes related to Jupiter. These changes appeared to fall outside the scope of previous human scientific understanding. Perceiving this, Chen Yue immediately diverted some of the telescopes and probes observing the sun toward Jupiter, voraciously absorbing data as he had done with the sun. Even before the impact occurred, Chen Yue had already prepared data storage space. Now vast streams of observational data surged in like a breached flood, rapidly filling the hard drives. Jupiter's magnetic field structure, internal structure, convection patterns, the Sun's internal structure, detailed solar atmospheric data, sunspots and prominences, coronal mass ejection models, star-planet interaction patterns. Precious data from countless subjects were generated in this brief period, all recorded by Chen Yue. Trembling before the wrath of the Sun's violent transformation, Chen Yue's heart bloomed with joy. So much invaluable observational data, now effortlessly obtained. If human civilization still existed, those scientists would surely envy him beyond measure. They would never have such an opportunity in their lifetimes. And these precious data would undoubtedly provide immense impetus to the development of his scientific system. Thus Chen Yue observed for a full month, collecting data unceasingly before reluctantly ending his observation of the Sun and Jupiter. Time for the next task. Time to land. The total mass of the Yinghua spacecraft was about 600 tons. Based on Amalthea's mass and gravity, the spacecraft's weight upon landing would be only about 366 tons. This was within the structural strength tolerance of the Yinghua spacecraft, so there was no need to worry about being crushed by its own weight. Yet this landing was still no easy feat. Amalthea's escape velocity was 58 meters per second. That is, if uncontrolled and falling straight down, the impact velocity with the moon's hard surface would also be 58 meters per second, roughly 210 kilometers per hour. Recalling his driving experiences on Earth, 120 kilometers per hour was enough to smash a car to pieces, let alone 210 kilometers per hour. He still needed to reduce speed. Chen Yue hoped the final touchdown velocity would be kept within 5 kilometers per hour, that is 1 4 meters per second. At most it must not exceed 1.6 meters per second. If it did, the hull would be at serious risk of damage. After much deliberation and weighing of options, Chen Yue ultimately chose a more complex landing trajectory. The Yinghua spacecraft first decelerated. Losing sufficient orbital velocity, it began a slow descent in its orbit. If left unaltered after about several dozen orbits around Amalthea, its path would degrade to a collision course. Yet Chen Yue made no further maneuvers, allowing the spacecraft to draw ever closer to the moon. After circling more than 20 times, Chen Yue finally reignited the engines to decelerate fully. When the velocity dropped to just a few meters per second, the spacecraft was positioned precisely between Jupiter and Amalthea. Thus, Jupiter partially counteracted Amalthea's gravity, reducing it further. At this moment, the attitude control thrusters of the Yinghua spacecraft activated, tilting the hull upright. The main engine then fired again, using Jupiter's gravity and its own thrust to suspend the spacecraft temporarily at about 50 meters above Amalthea's surface. After canceling all velocity, the main engine shut down and the spacecraft began a slow descent. Amalthea's gravitational acceleration was 2 millimeters per second squared, meaning that with each passing second, the Yinghua spacecraft's falling speed increased by 2 millimeters. However, on the side facing Jupiter, due to the planet's gravitational influence, this acceleration decreased to about 1.8 millimeters. At this rate of descent, it would take the Yinghua spacecraft approximately 75 seconds to fall from 50 meters to the ground. At that point, the contact velocity would be roughly 1.35 meters per second. This speed fell within the safe range and was acceptable. After beginning the descent, Chen Yue hurriedly adjusted the Yinghua spacecraft's attitude, shifting it from a vertical to a horizontal position. The attitude control thrusters worked at full capacity, finally completing the adjustment at the very last moment before ground contact. The next instant, the Yinghua spacecraft, weighing over 600 tons, softly slammed onto Amalthea's surface, sliding forward about 100 meters under the inertia of its lateral movement, before finally coming to a complete stop. Throughout this entire process, Chen Yue's heart was in his throat, constantly tense. This step was far too. If any vital component were damaged during this process, or if some irreparable harm were done, the consequences would be catastrophic. After landing, Chen Yue dared not slacken for a moment. He immediately directed Xiao Bai to visually inspect the hull for damage and read data from tens of thousands of sensors to confirm the spacecraft's status. The final result allowed Chen Yue to breathe a sigh of relief. Aside from a large tear in the hull caused by collision with Amalthea's surface rocks, there was no other damage. If there were still life on Amalthea, this damage would have been too severe, essentially irreparable. Fortunately, Chen Yue no longer needed a life support environment. His tense mood finally began to ease. The hatch of the Yinghua spacecraft opened and the hull's video probe extended. At last, Chen Yue could view the planet's environment up close with his own eyes. In the vast firmament, a bright star blazed with light. Beside the star, a colossal planet, nearly filling half the sky with distinct bands upon its surface, gazed like an eye upon the dark red land beneath. The ground was pockmarked with craters, traces of impacts everywhere. In the distance there were mountains, and a great slope upon which something green and brown mingled, its identity unknown. Eternal desolation, silent as death, bone-chilling cold. Chen Yue knew this was the place where he would stay for countless years to come. The environment here was indescribably harsh. Yet Chen Yue's spirit soared with exhilaration. This will surely be a brand new starting point for human civilization. Thus he mused. Contrary to common perception, Amalthea is not shrouded in darkness. At least not on the side facing Jupiter. Though it lies over 700 million kilometers from the sun, the star remains remarkably bright from this vantage. Brighter even than a full moon seen from Earth, casting distinct shadows. The recent collision with a debris planet has only intensified its radiance. Meanwhile, Jupiter looms so close and luminous that it too casts shadows upon Amalthea's surface. Thus objects on Amalthea bear two shadows. The combined light from the sun and Jupiter bestows upon the moon an illumination akin to a dusky twilight on an overcast Earth day. Beyond these two brightest celestial bodies, 4 other stars gleam brilliantly in the sky. Chen Yue knew them as the 4 great satellites Io, Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto. Further still, a magnificent ribbon of light arches across the entire heavens. As Amalthea orbits Jupiter, this band shifts, sometimes broad, sometimes narrow, occasionally vanishing entirely. A truly wondrous sight. It was Jupiter's ring, far from the sun and home, yet this realm was a dazzling kaleidoscopic world unto itself. After savoring the alien vista for a while, Chen Yue did not rest. Fatigue was unknown to him now, and promptly commenced his next tasks. Throughout the years-long voyage to the Jovian system, Chen Yue had pondered one question above all: how to revive his civilization. Countless tasks lay ahead, but a sequence was essential. His final conclusion, after weighing his current situation and circumstances, was that building a few robots took paramount precedence. All other goals and missions could wait. At this very moment, the only mobile unit under Chen Yue's command was a single robot named Xiaobai. Should Xiaobai malfunction, break down, or be damaged, Chen Yue would be rendered immobile once more. As for how to manufacture robots, Chen Yue faced no dilemma. The central computer of the spacecraft Yinghua housed an immense database cataloging knowledge from the steam age through the electrical age across nearly every discipline. Naturally, the most cutting-edge frontier or specialized knowledge was absent. The database's primary purpose was to compensate for the inconvenient communication lag between Mars and Earth. Should an accident sever contact between the 2 astronauts aboard Yinghua or on Mars, could consult it to devise their own solutions. Now this database had become Chen Yue's most precious asset. After merging with the computer, this knowledge had truly become his own. He could not only commit it to memory, but with his vast computational power instantly comprehend and master it, applying it with fluid ingenuity. Thus, by synthesizing principles of robotics, repair manuals, and circuit data, Chen Yue simulated and independently devised a method for manufacturing robots. The method was ready and materials were not lacking. His earlier looting of the Mars base had yielded an abundance of. During interstellar voyage, the lack of gravity aboard Yinghua precluded manufacturing. Now that they had landed, though Amalthea's gravity was weak, it sufficed. Production was imperative. With Xiaobai as his hands and smart machine tools and 3D printers as his manufacturing platforms, Chen Yue spent 3 full days to finally assemble a brand new robot. This robot stood about 1.5 meters tall, equipped with 4 arms and 4 wheels. Those wheels could unfold into legs, granting it superior mobility. Its designated role was that of a maintenance robot. With its dexterous mechanical arms, it could repair almost anything, even itself. First ensure I won't be paralyzed, then I can think about development, Chen Yue mused. Gazing at the somewhat crude cable-exposed number 2 robot, he felt deep satisfaction. Upon completing number 2, Chen Yue pressed on without pause, fabricating robots 3 through 10, 8 new units in total. Thus his forces multiplied tenfold, granting him 10 robots at his command. After these 9 were finished, Chen Yue halted production. These 9 robots had been assembled from components carried aboard Yinghua, and the supply of original parts was limited. From now on, these components must be reserved for critical applications. For less important parts, they'll have to produce. Living off reserves was unsustainable. He needed the ability to regenerate. Accordingly, Chen Yue dispatched Xiaobai and robots 4 through 10 to begin work. Robots 2 and 3 remained inside the spacecraft as a contingency to prevent total loss in case of an accident. These 8 robots fanned out to 8 different locations, conducting detailed field surveys of previously identified mineral zones. The survey results were reasonably satisfactory. He found nearly all the minerals he required. Though some rare metals were absent, the reserves aboard Yinghua could sustain him for a while. The ores found on Amalthea were of mediocre quality and limited quantity, but their mere presence was enough. Chen Yue dared not ask for more. After confirming the locations, grades, and types of the deposits, Chen Yue swiftly devised a mining plan. The intelligent ore refining robot was undoubtedly the plan's core. By adjusting various parameters, it could process and refine dozens of metal ores, though speed was not its. No matter, Chen Yue could afford to wait. Thus the 8 robots transformed into diligent laborers. They manually mined the ore and transported it to the intelligent refiner, which processed, and smelted it into alloys meeting specifications. These metals were then conveyed to the smart machine tools for further processing into components. Limited by performance, the quality of parts from this production line was generally substandard, failing to meet performance targets. But Chen Yue cared little. At this stage, having something usable sufficed, what more could he hope for? Yet the smart machine tools had their limitations. Some overly precise components were beyond their capability. That was when the 3D printer stepped in. Chen Yue always believed that among all the equipment he owned besides Xiao, the most important device was the 3D printer. This 3D printer was designed for use in extraterrestrial environments. As long as there were suitable materials and corresponding manufacturing blueprints, it could almost create any mechanical device. Under ideal conditions, it could even print a tractor by itself. Of course, on Jupiter's moon Europa, Chen Yue had no use for a tractor. However, using it to print some high-precision complex components that intelligent machine tools could not manufacture was completely within its capabilities. Thus, with robots mining and refining intelligent machine tools processing less demanding components, and the 3D printer producing high-precision parts, Chen Yue's expansion plan was successfully executed. After 3 failures and burning 3 robots, the 4th robot finally started up successfully. It was also designed by Chen Yue with 4 wheels and 4 mechanical arms to expand its functionality as much as possible. It was equipped with a lithium battery that could operate for about 14 hours under ideal load conditions. Calculating a daily operation of 14 hours and a charging time of 10 hours, the robot, which Chen Yue named Mu-E type, had an expected total lifespan of about 3 months. In other words, Chen Yue could guarantee that they would work normally for 3 months. After 3 months, the probability of various failures would greatly increase, leading to complete breakdowns that required recycling. The main reason for this was that the quality of the components could not match those brought from the Mars base and Earth. At this stage, the components manufactured by Chen Yue were still somewhat inferior. But that was fine, he could improve them gradually. Chen Yue spent 2 months increasing the number of Mu-Wu type robots to 100. Thus, the total number of robots under Chen Yue's command rose to 110. These 110 robots were active within a radius of about 20 kilometers centered around the Yinghua spaceship, busily shuttling all day long. Some robots were specifically responsible for mining and splitting, or others for transportation, some for refining, and others for processing. They coordinated with each other, working in an orderly manner without any confusion. Each of these robots was directly controlled by Chen Yue. Compared to the vast computing power he possessed, controlling over 100 robots was not a challenge at all. It required hardly any effort. The computing power consumed by calculating a difficult math problem was far greater than this. It was precisely because Chen Yue directly controlled all these robots that their coordination was so seamless. Often, just as the transport robot arrived at the mining site, the mining robot would have prepared the ore to be transported, lifting it up and directly placing it onto the transport robot without a second's delay. Similarly, just as the refining robot finished processing the last batch of ore and sent it for subsequent processing when new ore was needed, a transport robot would arrive with the exact requirements without wasting a second. In this situation, among the more than 100 busy robots, the error rate was nearly 0 and the loss rate was minimized. After a busy period, there was finally a hint of liveliness on Europa. However, after producing 100 Mu-Wu type robots, Chen Yue halted further military expansion. Of course, he could still produce more. There were still some components left in the Yinghua spaceship's reserves, enough to create about 1,000 more. But Chen Yue realized that this was progressing too slowly. Strictly speaking, each of the robots he manufactured was a handcrafted version. They were made one by one rather than being produced on an assembly line like those in factories on Earth. At most, Chen Yue's robot factory at this moment was merely a small workshop. And as is well known, handcrafted workshops are easily crushed by standardized assembly line factories. Not only in terms of cost, but also in other aspects, production capacity and quality would be overwhelmed. Having just over 100 robots is far from enough. Even in the early stages of my development, I would need at least several 100,000 robots to be sufficient. Can I really rely on myself to make each one by hand? This won't work. I must scale up, or I must standardize. At this moment, having resolved the danger of paralysis, Chen Yue set his sights on scaling. He decided to build a robot factory. A real robot factory. No, perhaps it should not be called a factory, it should be an industrial zone. A Mu-Wu type robot consists of about 10,000 components. Among them, 9652 parts are of lower precision and can be manufactured by himself. These 9652 parts require at least 32 supporting factories for production. Afterwards, they would be sent to the assembly plant for final assembly. This way, a standardized robot could be produced. Furthermore, these 32 supporting factories require cooperation from upstream factories like power plants, steel mills, and chemical plants. When all is calculated, this industrial zone would require hundreds of factories to operate effectively. But, one step at a time, Chen Yue thought to himself, let's start with the most crucial factory first. He planned to build a power plant. At this stage, the energy source for Chen Yue himself, all robots and all equipment, was entirely from the Yinghua space. It relied on the remaining fuel inside to drive the engines for power generation, along with a few plutonium isotope batteries supplying electricity to these consumers. However, the remaining fuel was already scarce, and the power provided by the plutonium isotope batteries was limited. Considering all factors, building a power plant was essential. Having made the decision, Chen Yue immediately got to work. The technical difficulty of a small power plant was not high. Even if he continued to build them by hand, he could produce the relevant equipment. At most, the quality would not be as high, but it would definitely be usable. He planned to generate electricity through traditional means by heating water. In simple terms, it involved generating high-pressure steam by heating water to drive the generator, thereby producing electrical energy. This required a boiler, a generator, and some other supporting equipment. The robot army's mind, ores were no longer used for manufacturing robots, but instead began producing equipment for the power plant. Another batch of robots left the Yinghua spaceship to explore further places. To build a power plant, fuel was essential. After preliminary exploration, Chen Yue ultimately selected a compound called propylene as the fuel. At room temperature, propylene is a colorless flammable gas, a hydrocarbon. However, on Amalthea, due to its extremely low temperature, it exists in solid form. Previous explorations of Amalthea, including ongoing satellite surveys, have indicated a relatively widespread presence of this organic compound on the moon. As for the specific formation mechanism and why these substances exist on Amalthea, Chen Yue is uncertain. His preliminary speculation was that, similar to the sulfur on Amalthea, they might have been ejected from Io. On Earth, propylene is commonly used as an industrial chemical. Although it is flammable, no one would use it to boil water for electricity generation. But here on Amalthea, there was little room for pickiness. As long as it could burn and release heat, it would suffice. Besides propylene, another crucial element was needed to boil water and generate electricity: oxygen. Oxygen also existed on Amalthea, frozen solid by the extreme cold scattered across the moon's surface like blocks of ice. Previous satellite surveys had detected some concentrated areas of solid oxygen. Chen Yue had already dispatched robotic prospecting units to conduct field explorations. Upon the dark red terrain, 7 robotic prospecting teams were dispersed across various locations. The oxygen prospecting team was the first to report good news. At the edge of a massive impact crater named Gaia, the robotic prospectors discovered vast quantities of solid oxygen. Of course, it was impure, mixed with various impurities, other gases, numerous fragments of rock and dust. It was easy to imagine that once Chen Yue vaporized this solid oxygen, turning it back into gas, the resulting air would be incredibly foul. If used for breathing, a single inhalation might be suffocating. Yet as before, it didn't matter. As long as it could make the fuel burn, Chen Yue cared little about the air quality. Using various instruments, the prospecting robots roughly estimated the oxygen or reserves at this site. The result was satisfactory to Chen Yue. This location alone likely contained hundreds of thousands of tons of oxygen, enough for his use for a considerable time. Moreover, other sites had also shown some oxygen reserves. However, the exploration for propylene, or on the other side, was far from optimistic. The robotic prospectors arrived at a location previously identified by satellite surveys as having substantial propylene deposits. After field testing, the results made Chen Yue's heart sink. What's going on? Only this thin layer on the surface. A thickness of just over 10 centimeters. Doesn't that mean this entire area holds at most a few tons? That can't be right. Chen Yue refused to accept it. He manipulated a robot to dig on site. Indeed, just over 10 centimeters of the propylene layer lay atop dark gray rock. Let's check other places. The robotic prospectors set out again across the desolate, deathly silent dark red terrain, heading to another site previously identified by satellite surveys as having propylene reserves. But the result this time was even worse. Not only was the propylene layer of poor quality, mixed with too many impurities making separation and purification difficult, but the reserves were also even smaller. Its thickness was less than 10 centimeters. A sense of foreboding crept into Chen Yue's heart. Amalthea was not large, its circumference was less than 1,000 kilometers. Chen Yue directed the prospecting teams to set out from different directions, surveying all previously confirmed propylene deposit sites identified by satellites. Half a month later, the final results came in. Not a single deposit site held more than 1,000 tons of propylene. Not even 1,000 tons. What use was that? It might be enough to heat water for a bath, but for power generation, that was laughable. This result caught Chen Yue completely off guard. The planned construction of a power plant had to be delayed as a result. Yet the power plant was a crucial facility, the foundation for all future construction. Without it, Chen Yue could do nothing. Moreover, once the fuel on the spacecraft Yinghua was exhausted, without electricity, he would die. He had to find it. I must find new sufficiently abundant combustible organic compounds, Chen Yue thought silently. For now, building a nuclear power plant was impractical. He lacked the fuel and the technology. A solar power plant was also unrealistic, as they were too far from the sun. And wind power, even more impossible. Amalthea had no atmosphere, so there was no wind. What about geothermal power? There was evidence suggesting Amalthea had a hot core, likely due to Jupiter's tidal forces. But with Chen Yue's current technological level, it was completely unattainable. The only potentially viable option was chemical energy, in simpler terms burning things to generate electricity. Chen Yue fully mobilized the satellites previously placed in orbit around Amalthea, meticulously surveying the moon's surface in search of new organic compounds. After extensive searching, many organic compounds were found: methane, ethane, butane, ethylene, and thousands of other combustible organics. But they all shared one problem: their reserves were too small, even less than propylene, and extraction was difficult. Mining them might consume more electricity than they could generate. Chen Yue's attention turned to the brown or green unknown areas on Amalthea's surface. Survey satellites could not identify what they were. Chen Yue also thought they were unlikely to be combustible organic compounds. But now he had to take a look. The robotic prospectors set out once more, heading to the nearest large green area. It took 2 days to arrive. What is this stuff? Chen Yue manipulated the robot to press its camera almost against the ground. There a pale green, opaque, ice-like crystal lay. Carefully he chipped off a piece and placed it in a heating chamber. As it warmed, various gases were released. Chen Yue meticulously analyzed them and was unexpectedly and delightfully surprised to detect methane, ethane, propylene, butylene, and dozens of other combustible organic gases. No way. The immense surprise left Chen Yue slightly dizzy. He recalled something that existed only on frozen celestial bodies. Tholin. Tholin is a copolymer molecule formed from various organic compounds under ultraviolet radiation. It cannot form on Earth, so it doesn't exist here. Could it be that these strange green or brown substances were all Tholin? Can Tholin burn? Of course it can. It is, after all, the product of complex processes involving many organic compounds. Then, the robot raised its head, looking ahead. Before it stretched an endless green plain. Chen Yue made a rough calculation and arrived at a preliminary conclusion. Even within this plain alone, despite the modest thickness of the Tholin deposits, the total reserves amounted to at least millions of tons. And this was merely one location. Satellite surveys indicated that other areas of Amalthea were also covered in extensive patches of this greenish hue. Chen Yue could not determine the exact total Tholin reserves across all regions, but he was certain they were substantial. At the very least, they would suffice to sustain him through the early stages of development. By the time these Tholin reserves were depleted, he might well have the capability to leave Amalthea and reach other moons. By then, would there still be a shortage of fuel? A surge of exhilaration filled Chen Yue's heart. Without further ado, the mining robots commenced their work. The team first cut several large blocks of acetylene totaling roughly a dozen tons and dragged them back to the camp. At that moment, the equipment for the power plant was being hastily assembled by hand. The ore refining robots meticulously extracted the required minerals. The intelligent machine tools processed them into components. The 3D printer fabricated complex parts beyond conventional machining, and the robots acted as operators undertaking the assembly work. After several days of relentless labor, a peculiar cauldron-like structure was finally produced. It measured approximately 5 meters in diameter and 3 meters in height, divided into a combustion chamber and a steam chamber with intricate pipes extending outward. One of these pipes connected to another tank similar in shape, but smaller in size. By this time, the generator had also been completed. Several robots worked together to move it into place, coupling it with the boiler, while another pipe from the smaller tank was linked to the generator. On the other side of the generator, 2 cables were connected, leading to a lighting fixture. The fuel pre-processing robot fed solid oxygen and acetylene into the smaller tank through 2 inlets. Here, the 2 substances would undergo initial treatment. They would first be heated, melting from solid to gas. During this process, impurities such as dust and gravel would settle to the bottom due to gravity and eventually be expelled. The oxygen and the combustible gases released by the heated Tholin would then be sent to the combustion chamber after a simple filtration. Subsequently, the ignition system would activate, igniting the 2 gases and releasing heat. The heat would warm the upper layer of water ice, causing it to boil and vaporize, thereby generating immense. This high-pressure steam would rush through the pipes to the generator, driving the rotation of its fan blades. The blades would turn the wires, cutting through magnetic field lines, and electricity would be produced continuously. Now it was time for the first experiment. Cables extending from the Inghua spacecraft supplied power to the pre-processing unit. After the temperature rose, Chen Yue carefully operated the release of gas into the combustion chamber and ignited it. The pressure sensor relayed the current pressure inside the steam chamber. Before ignition, the internal pressure was nearly zero, as Amalthea's extreme cold meant there was virtually no atmospheric pressure. But once the burning began, the pressure rose rapidly as the water ice melted. Soon it reached the equivalent of 1 standard Earth atmosphere. On the near-vacuum surface of Amalthea, a tank with an internal pressure of 1 atmosphere was essentially a bomb. If the material strength was inadequate, it would explode with a bang. Chen Yue felt a twinge of worry. Yet it turned out that his handcrafted boiler, though perhaps of mediocre quality, could indeed withstand such pressure. The pressure continued to rise. When it finally reached a threshold, the valve burst open and scorching high-pressure steam surged out. The generator began to vibrate gently, and the heavy fan blades slowly started to rotate. The next moment, the suspended lighting fixture flickered. It flashed and then dimmed. Clearly the voltage was unstable at that moment. Chen Yue remained patient, waiting calmly. As expected, after a few seconds of stabilization, the light glowed steadily, without further flickering. The soft radiance illuminated the dim surface of Amalthea, making Chen Yue feel as though he had sensed warmth akin to sunlight. Within this glow seemed to reside something called hope. With the support of solid oxygen and icephalin, there was finally a light here that he had created with his own hands, not one reliant on the relics of human civilization. Chen Yue's heart stirred with emotion. Though it was merely enough power to light a single bulb, he could already envision a grand future. He extinguished the light, and the electricity flowed through pre-laid cables to a nearby shed that had been constructed. Inside the shed there were dozens of seat-like structures upon which robots were already sitting and waiting. Each robot had an interface connected to its seat, through which a steady stream of electricity entered their bodies, powering their subsequent operations. Finally, there was no longer a need to draw power from the Yinghua spacecraft. That precious fuel could now be conserved for emergencies. After the generator had run for a while, Chen Yue also disconnected the power that had been drawn from the Yinghua spacecraft to heat the icephalin and solid oxygen in the preprocessing unit. The steam that had driven the generator's fan blades still retained high temperatures. It was originally meant to be cooled and recycled. Rather than letting the heat it carried go to waste, it could be used to thaw the solid oxygen and icephalin, a mutually beneficial arrangement. Thus, this crude open-air power plant began its cyclic operation. As long as no malfunctions occurred and fuel was supplied, it could generate electricity endlessly. The power plant Chen Yue had designed allowed for adjustable output. At the moment, its output was approximately 60 kilowatts, equivalent to 60 kilowatt-hours per hour. After Chen Yue's allocation, this electricity would be distributed to charge the robots, barely sufficient to sustain their daily tasks. If future demands increased, Chen Yue could boost the generator's power up to a maximum of 200 kilowatts or 200 kilowatt-hours per hour. This generation rate could not even support an ordinary small village on Earth. Yet on Amalthea, Chen Yue felt it was a critical step in his development. Most importantly, it proved that his approach of generating his own electricity to sustain subsequent industrialization was entirely feasible. Good, the next step is to expand the power plant scale. Also, the construction of a steel mill should be put on the agenda. Chen Yue did not even consider improving efficiency, precision, quality, reliability, or reducing waste. At this moment, those were not matters he could afford to ponder. Simply increasing quantity, first boosting power generation, was the urgent priority. When it came to expanding the power plant scale and increasing electricity generation, Chen Yue once again profoundly felt the constraints imposed by his insufficient metal processing capabilities. Pretreatment units, boilers, generators, and wires. All were made of metal, all reliant on the metallurgical industry for resources. But for now, Chen Yue could only rely on a pitiful few multifunctional ore refining robots, which could only produce a meager amount of metal each day through customized modes. It wasn't that Chen Yue didn't want to build more ore refining robots, they were power guzzlers. Moreover, the supply of raw materials, namely, ore, was limited. Building more would outstrip the ore supply. Increase the ore supply. That would require more mining robots. But building mining robots also required steel. This formed a vicious cycle. Chen Yue's only solution was to grind it out over time, slowly increasing production. A good start had been made, at least the robots no longer needed to charge at the Yinghua spacecraft. The ore refining robots could also operate at full capacity without worrying about power consumption. Thus, aside from reserving 3 robots to maintain the power plant's normal operation and assigning 27 robots to collect solid oxygen and Bingchuan, all remaining deployable robots were thrown into the campaign of or collection. The diligent footsteps of the robots covered dozens of kilometers around the Yinghua spacecraft. Wherever there were mineral deposits, the robots were there. Massive chunks of ore converged here, eventually transforming into ingots of steel ready to be processed by the intelligent machine tools. Under these circumstances, an electric blast furnace capable of smelting a wide variety of ores and refining multiple metals was finally produced. Typically, a blast furnace is used to smelt only one type of metal and only one grade. Only then is the quality stable and the efficiency high. This was also the standard practice on Earth. No one had ever heard of a blast furnace that could smelt steel, copper, tin, and aluminum all at once. A universal blast furnace had low efficiency, poor quality, and was uneconomical. But this choice was inevitable for Chen Yue on this moon Jupiter V. Again, it was due to insufficient production capacity. Building a separate blast furnace for each metal and each grade specification was simply impractical. However, even with its flaws, this blast furnace was at least much faster at smelting than the ore refining robots. One furnace was almost equivalent to 20 refining robots. This was a tremendous leap in efficiency. Chen Yue enthusiastically connected the wires to the electric blast furnace, adjusted the generator's power to maximum, and then started the furnace to begin smelting the first batch of metal ores. This time he was smelting a batch of iron ore. Chen Yu's ultimate goal was to refine it into steel with sufficient low-temperature resistance. This was also the raw material with the highest consumption for manufacturing robots. Chen Yu's demand for it was, if the blast furnace could take over this part of the demand, the ore refining robots could focus on smelting key metals with higher performance requirements but lower demand. The blast furnace vibrated slightly as electricity was converted into heat, heating the ores. Through a series of high-temperature processes, they were refined and purified with corresponding elements added to enhance their performance. Eventually, molten red iron flowed out, solidified, and formed into steel ingots. This furnace run produced a total of 100 kilograms of steel ingots. Compared to the gigantic furnaces on Earth that produced thousands or tens of thousands of tons, this output was negligible. But it was still enough to excite Chen Yue. One blast furnace's capacity hasn't been fully unleashed yet. With sufficient power supply and full power operation, it could smelt an average of 300 kilograms of steel per day. 300 kilograms, enough to build 4 robots. No need to say more. Fire up the furnace and keep smelting. Chen Yue grew even more excited. Bingquan and solid oxygen burned fiercely, the generators ran continuously, and electricity was supplied steadily to the blast furnace and the robots. Molten iron flowed out continuously, was transported to the intelligent machine tools, and used to manufacture a new generator. Drawing on the experience of the first generator, the power of this second generator was increased slightly, reaching 250 kilowatts. It was then started and smoothly connected to the grid. With sufficient electricity, the blast furnace immediately went into full swing, finally reaching its rated output of 300 kilograms per day. At this point, Chen Yue could have built more blast furnaces and generators. But he didn't. The number of robots was anymore would leave a shortage of mining and fuel robots. The total of 30 robots collecting Bingquan and solid oxygen could at most supply power to 2 generators. The remaining robots scurried about, working at full capacity to collect minerals. They were more than enough to supply 1 blast furnace, but if there were 2, their efforts would fall short. It was truly a case of having the will, but not the means. The will referred to Chen Yu's computational power. Even when mobilizing all robots and machinery, it used far less than 1%. The remaining computational power was all idle. The means were naturally lacking. With ample computational power but no robots to use, Chen Yue always remembered that his top priority was to build a robot production line and produce more robots. Power generation and smelting were all in service of rapidly expanding the robot count. He could not lose sight of the fundamentals for the trivialities. Under these circumstances, Chen Yue decisively halted the construction of generators and blast furnaces and instead began building a metal processing plant using the steel produced by the blast furnace. 1 intelligent machine tool and 1 3D printer were simply insufficient in processing capacity. In fact, the steel produced at this stage had already exceeded what the intelligent machine tool could handle. The 3D printer was responsible for high-precision components and could not be replaced for now, but the intelligent machine tool could eventually be replaced. The metal processing plant would take on this role. Like the power plant and the steel plant, the metal processing plant was also imbued with a style of makeshift, casual, usable, without caring about anything else. Chen Yue abandoned all aesthetics, pursuing only the fulfillment of minimum requirements. Guided by this philosophy, the metal processing plant was still open air, without even a workshop. A random patch of land next to the steel plant and power plant was chosen as the site for the metal processing plant. The intelligent machine tool produced components piece by piece, eventually assembling various metal processing equipment. After 2 months, the metal processing plant was finally completed. From that moment on, Chen Yue finally possessed independent metal processing capabilities not inherited from human civilization. Ideally, it could process about 1 ton of metal per day for parts of ordinary difficulty. With the power plant, steel mill, and metal processing plant established, Chen Yue finally had no obstacles standing between him and his ultimate goal, the robot assembly plant. The primary production tools of the robot assembly plant were still robots themselves, albeit customized ones. They required no mobility, needing only to remain fixed in place, executing a predetermined sequence of component assembly tasks. Chen Yue initially envisioned creating an assembly line, but after weighing the practical realities, he ultimately abandoned the idea. An assembly line could barely be built, but where would all the components come from? All components had to be custom-made at present, with no specialized factories in existence. Building an assembly line was pointless. In the end, all the parts had to be transported in bulk, and assembling robots became akin to an elderly craftswoman working on a handicraft, installing each component one by one. This type of robot demanded a high degree of intelligence. After all, these machines had to autonomously determine the position of each part, track the current assembly progress, and devise a unique assembly process for nearly every unit among countless other tasks. Chen Yue dared to claim that even the most advanced assembly plants on Earth could not produce robots of such intelligence. Yet here it posed no issue at all. Chen Yue simply had to directly manipulate the assembly robots to work. He could focus on a myriad of tasks simultaneously with vast amounts of computational power lying idle. Ultimately, the robot assembly plant was completed in just over half a month. The plant, which carried Chen Yue's high hopes, also had no factory building and remained open air. Its exterior resembled a large platform 10 meters long and 8 meters wide. Upon this 8 square meter platform, dozens of fixed multi-arm robots were installed. Beside the multi-arm robots were piles upon piles of components. A single robot required approximately over 10,000 parts spanning more than 300 types. Thus, each type of component formed its own heap on the work table, totaling over 300 piles. The long arms of the multi-arm robots moved across the different piles, taking a few parts from one heap and some from another, combining them and gradually shaping a robot. When pushed to its maximum capacity, the robot assembly plant could produce about 10 robots per day on average. However, limited by insufficient raw material supply, it could only churn out 4 per day. Now was the moment the first robot rolled off the line. After assembly by the mechanical arms, the embedded chip was successfully activated, and in the next instant it established contact with Chen Yue via radio. Commands from Chen Yue poured in, precisely regulating and sensing every sensor and every controller within the robot's body. This brand new robot slowly straightened its body, lifted one of its 4 legs, and stepped down from the work table. Then, facing the leveled surface of Jupiter's moon, it curled its 4 legs into wheels and cheerfully rolled forward, merging into the robot army. This is the first robot manufactured through a factory, not custom-built by me. Chen Yue mused silently, a sense of emotion stirring within him. The production efficiency of robots will only grow faster. One day I will command 100 million, a billion, even 10 billion, or 100 billion robots. These 4 factories were finally completed and smoothly operational. Over the following year, Chen Yue made no major changes, continuing production in a steady, methodical manner. At the start, with all 4 factories running at full capacity, the demands for energy and/or left Chen Yue scrambling, acutely feeling the shortage of manpower. But as new robots were produced one after another, the manpower shortage was quickly resolved. Within just a month, a surplus of robots emerged. Yet Chen Yue did not immediately command the robots to build new factories. Instead, he deployed all surplus robots to the mining of ice, solid oxygen, and various ores. He designated a specific area as a mining site, stockpiling all the extracted but temporarily and used minerals there. By today, a year later, he had amassed over 100,000 tons. On this day, the number of robots under Chen Yue's command for the first time in history surpassed the milestone of 1,500. Now there were 1501. No, with another new robot rolling off the line, 1502 robots at Chen. Over 1,500 robots were enough to undertake relatively large-scale projects. With ample manpower at his command, Chen Yue was brimming with ambition. This time he initiated 2 projects simultaneously: a generator with an installed capacity of 100 kW and a blast furnace specifically for producing Type 109 steel under ultra-low temperature conditions. This blast furnace would be the first specialized piece of equipment in Chen Yue's arsenal. Specialization meant efficiency, economy, and stable quality, though at the cost of narrow applicability. But now commanding 1,500 robots and owning 4 factories, Chen Yue felt he should aspire to higher standards than before. He also set higher demands for the generator. Its energy consumption was to be only double that of the 250 kilowatts generator, yet its power output was to reach 4 times. This was a monumental leap in quality. Supported by the vast reserves of energy and minerals stockpiled earlier, the 1,500 robots threw themselves into this industrial upgrade campaign. The final results were gratifying. Both projects were completed, and Chen Yue's productivity soared once again. Afterwards, he immediately planned 5 more tasks. A generator with an installed capacity of 200 kW, 2 specialized blast furnaces, a processing plant dedicated to manufacturing support pillars, the most frequently used component in robots, and a larger robot assembly line. A year later, Chen Yue's robot production capacity had risen to an average of 20 units per day. Every day, an endless stream of robots descended from the production platforms, plunging into the fervent construction site on Jupiter's moon. The intense construction tasks yielded more fuel and/or which in turn produced more robots. Thus, a virtuous cycle was established. Now, exactly 10 years after Chen Yue landed on Jupiter's moon, the number of robots under his command had skyrocketed to 30,000. These robots were not only greater in number. With ample production capacity, Chen Yue began pursuing various specialized models, abandoning the previous philosophy of multipurpose machines. After all, it was well known that versatility often meant mediocrity. Specializing in a single function with multiple types of robots cooperating was the only way to achieve peak efficiency. At this moment, the total of over 30,000 robots under Chen Yu's command had been categorized into 9 major classes comprising more than 200 distinct types. Among them, some types, though called robots, had begun to evolve toward machinery, such as specialized mining robots, whose forms somewhat resembled excavators on Earth. Equipped with heating and crushing capabilities, they could conveniently melt solid oxygen or ice tholin or break down iron ore and copper or for extraction. Alternatively, transport robots, which bore a resemblance to Earth's trucks, featured a large cargo bed capable of hauling substantial quantities of fuel or ore. Of course, they were all intelligent and could be directly controlled by Chen Yue. For this reason, he still habitually referred to them as robots. Furthermore, for power plants, steel mills, and metal processing factories, Chen Yue had also developed specialized robot models to maintain their operations. These robots had extremely singular functions. For instance, a certain type used in power plants had only one task: to clear and transport residue, incapable of anything else. Yet precisely because of their singular function, their efficiency in that specific task was higher. By now, the crude factories and machines built at the time of his initial arrival had long completed their historical mission and retired with honor. Industrial upgrading could not be achieved overnight, nor could the performance of production tools surge in a short time. They had to improve slowly through continuous iteration, bit by bit. Just like those generators, which initially had an installed capacity of merely 200 kilowatts, but later increased to 250 kilowatts, then to 1.0 kilowatts, and now to 1.0 kilowatts each. The total installed capacity rose sharply, while energy consumption per unit fell correspondingly. The same was true for the steel mill. Initially, there was only one general-purpose blast furnace with high energy consumption and low efficiency. Gradually, it improved, and now Chen Yue possessed a total of over 50 blast furnaces of various models, greatly enhancing production efficiency. At this point, Chen Yue's industrial zone had undergone a complete transformation. Of machinery was no longer directly exposed to the open air. Pursuing higher quality, he finally built factory buildings for them, moving them indoors. The new industrial zone still centered on the power plant. Its total installed capacity had now reached 3.0 kilowatts, consisting of 30 generators, each with a capacity of 1.0 kilowatts. It wasn't that Chen Yue couldn't build generators of larger capacity. Rather, electricity is difficult to store and is always consumed as it is generated. Overall power consumption fluctuated and could not remain stable. By setting each generator to a capacity of 1.0 kilowatts, Chen Yue could conveniently adjust the power output. When power demand was high, he would start more units. When demand was low, he would shut some down. Surrounding the power plant, the metal processing zone, smelting zone, robot production lines, and chemical zone were arranged in a ring. Now Chen Yue finally had the robot production lines he had long desired. The production of robots had barely met the requirements of assembly line and standardized manufacturing. Although the degree of standardization was not yet very high, it was nonetheless a good start. There were 9 production lines in total capable of producing 9 major categories of robots. Chen Yue had broken down robot production into different processes and steps, each handled by specialized robots. Once completed, the product was sent to the next step, greatly accelerating production speed and improving quality stability. By the way, during these 10 years, Chen Yue had also built a chemical plant. The importance of a chemical plant needed no elaboration. Without it, too many products could not be manufactured and would have to rely on existing stockpiles. Amalthea lacked many chemical raw materials with no coal or petroleum whatsoever. This forced Chen Yue to develop more synthetic pathways, creating various chemical raw materials from scratch. Given the vast variety of chemical raw materials, the chemical plant had to adopt a general-purpose approach, producing most materials through manual customization. The kind of scenario seen on Earth where a single chemical raw material, such as ethylene or sulfuric acid, would have a dedicated factory producing hundreds of thousands of tons annually was something Chen Yue dared not even imagine for now. Overall, Chen Yue felt that the entire industrial zone he now possessed was still insufficient in scale, lacking in specialization and subdivision, with many traces of generalization, customization, and small-scale manual workshop practices. It was still far from true industrialization. The road ahead is long and winding. Gazing at the colossal Jupiter and the bright sun, looking into the boundless expanse of space, a yearning arose in Chen Yue's heart. When will I have enough technological prowess to roam this vast universe? Keep working hard. The number of 30,000 robots sounded large, but in practice it proved insufficient. Chen Yue decided that for the foreseeable future his primary focus would remain on rapidly expanding the robot count. After all, with enough robots, tasks like building factories and opening mines could be accomplished. But now he perceived a major bottleneck to his production capacity: transport capacity. The transport capacity of the hauling robots was severely limited. Even though they traveled day and night across the desolate landscape of Amalthea, the amount of fuel and ore they could carry was still quite modest. Moreover, his industrial zone was too centralized. This was not a good sign. Excessive centralization meant that no matter where resources existed on Amalthea, they had to be transported here first to be utilized. This inevitably led to a waste of resources, transport capacity, and time on the road. In the early stages of development, such centralized development was necessary due to limited scale. But now his approach had to change. It was time to shift from centralized development to distributed development. Over these 10 years, with the help of satellites and on-site robot surveys, Chen Yue had never relaxed his exploration and understanding of Amalthea. Now he knew exactly where each mineral deposit was located on Amalthea, the terrain, the structure, and what each area was suitable for. Combining the data collected over time with his current needs and plans, after a brief calculation, a grand plan instantly took shape in Chen Yue's mind. Indeed, when a civilization reaches a certain stage, the essential task is infrastructure. Chen Yue sighed inwardly, then rallied his spirits. Then let's first build some railways. From mine no. 1 to mine no. 186, for all the currently discovered mining sites, Chen Yue planned to connect them all via railway. Even on Amalthea, rail transit remained the most convenient and economical means of transporting goods. Under Chen Yue's command, a vast number of engineering robots were mobilized, forming a mighty army to clear the path. At the forefront were the demolition robots. They were equipped with specialized drilling and explosive laying tools. Encountering mountains or uneven terrain, they would drill holes, plant detonators, and with a series of explosions, transport robots would immediately rush forward, loading the debris into their dumpers and hauling it away. Additionally, there were bridge-laying robots. When they came across depressions, these robots would take over. Chen Yue abandoned the concrete and steel construction plan and opted for an all-steel framework structure. Towering iron pillars rose from the desolate surface of Amalthea, hoisting the long rails into the air. Mining robots toiled day and night, delivering countless ores to the steel mills. The steel mills roared ceaselessly, producing vast quantities of steel, which were then sent to the foundries to be cast into rails. Once the track-laying robots prepared the roadbed, the rail-laying robots would lay the tracks directly. Compared to Earth, building a railway on Amalthea was a breeze. The low gravity meant the tracks did not need to bear immense pressure, allowing for less stringent material requirements. With no air, no wind, and no rain, there were no issues of oxidation or wind resistance. There were also no stray animals or lush vegetation, so even railway fences could be omitted. With such a cascade of simplifications, Chen Yue's track-laying progressed at an astonishing pace. In less than a year, the first railway was completed. This railway connected the core area with Iron Mine No. 3, adopting a double-track design with 5 intermediate stations linking a total of 5 mines No. 6 No. 9 No. 105 No. 112 and No. 137. Its total length reached 266 kilometers. Had it not been for the constraints of steel production capacity and the insufficient number of robots, this speed could have been even faster. By the time Railway No. 1 was completed, the first train had also been built and rolled off the production line. It featured a semicircular design, prioritizing maximum cargo capacity. Its locomotive was boxy and utilitarian, with no consideration given to aerodynamics. The train's total length was 1206 meters, with an internal cargo space totaling over 300 cubic meters. Given that the average density of crushed iron ore is 5 tons per cubic meter, this single train could transport up to 1500 tons of ore. This efficiency was leagues beyond rail transport on Earth. Typically on Earth, such a capacity would require a massive cargo ship. Yet on Amalthea, the energy consumed to transport this ore was even lower than that of maritime shipping on Earth. At the end of Railway No. 1 at the Iron Mine No. 3 site, rows of steel ingots stood like soldiers awaiting inspection, covering a vast area. Beside them, the steel mill Chen Yue had specially built was still operating at full blast, with robots continuously transporting new ingots out and stacking them there. Indeed, after deciding to build Railway No. 1, Chen Yue had directly commanded his robot army to construct a steel mill on-site at Iron Mine No. 3, along with supporting facilities like a power plant and a crusher, forming another industrial zone there. Now it was time to transport the products accumulated over the past year for further processing. Under Chen Yue's direct control, heavy lift robots deftly picked up massive steel ingots weighing over a dozen tons, moved them along the already leveled and hardened ground to the station, and directly placed them into the enormous cargo holds. One after another, nearly 10,000 ingots were loaded. Meanwhile, the power station dedicated to supplying electricity for the trains on Railway No. 1 had its generators spinning wildly, outputting at maximum capacity. A massive current flowed through the power lines on the towers flanking the rails to the train's engines. Over a dozen engines roared to life simultaneously, their immense force pulling the train, with a total mass of over 100,000 tons, slowly forward. At that moment, the very ground seemed to tremble. The train continued forward, accelerating steadily until it reached a speed of 100 kilometers per hour. In less than 3 hours, the steel ingots weighing over 100,000 tons were transported to the foundry at the end of the line. Chen Yue's heart swelled with exhilaration. In the past, moving these hundreds of thousands of tons of steel ingots would have required transport robots carrying 2 at a time, and it might not have been finished even after a month. Now it was all done in less than a day. This leap in efficiency was nothing short of monumental. The robots at the foundry immediately took over, beginning to process these ingots into individual components. Yet a sense of urgency once again gripped Chen Yue's mind. At this moment, immense transport capacity was available, but it had to be temporarily idled, because there simply wasn't enough cargo to transport. The steel mill had taken a full half-year to stockpile these ingots. The metallurgical plants at the other mines were still under construction, so naturally they had no products to output. Furthermore, even if those plants were completed, the processing capacity at the core area would be insufficient to digest such a volume of products. I must step up the effort. Not only can I not stop, but I must continue building and build on a grand scale. Chen Yue engaged in multi-front operations, commanding a total of over 30,000 robots, a number increasing by an average of 160 per day, and simultaneously initiated dozens of construction projects. A power generation center with a total installed capacity of 100 million kilowatts, located in a region rich in solid oxygen and ice, metal processing centers near various metal mining areas, and at each major mining sites, crushers, processing plants, smelters, and a second railway, all had commenced construction. With the core area as the epicenter within a radius of hundreds of kilometers, amid the bustling activity of over 30,000 robots and numerous factories, a semblance of prosperity began to emerge. But this is still not enough, far from enough. With my current industrial base, I can't even build an airplane, let alone a spaceship. I must push even harder. Chen Yue remained unsatisfied. He threw himself into this construction endeavor with unprecedented fervor. And not limited to industrial construction here, he also diverted considerable resources to another direction for exploration and development. This direction was even more critical than other aspects of construction. In fact, had Chen Yue not felt that his industrialization process had laid a certain foundation, he would not have dared to begin research in this area. Chips. The importance of chips need not be elaborated. Moreover, compared to ordinary civilizations, chips are particularly crucial for Chen Yue. This is because he himself relies on chips and computers to survive and to possess such immense construction capabilities. Yet the significance of chips extends far beyond this. To achieve intelligent control and extend his vast computational power and command to every minute detail of industry, such as the mechanical arms and wheels of each robot, the steering of every smart vehicle, and the cutting force and direction of milling cutters on intelligent machine tools. Each step requires corresponding chips. Otherwise, how could mere machinery comprehend Chen Yue's commands? In the course of massive production, Chen Yue had already minimized chip usage as much as possible. Yet, even so, as construction progressed to this point, the hundreds of thousands of chips extracted from the Mars base had already been depleted by more than half. I must have my own chip manufacturing capability, Chen Yue silently resolved. Not only does industry require it, but in the future, once my chip fabrication process is advanced enough, I will even develop more sophisticated computers to serve as my dwelling. Only with greater computational power can I truly drive technological progress single-handedly. In the core area, a vast factory quietly rose. This place would become the starting point for Chen Yue's research into chip technology. At the time of Earth's destruction, the most advanced chip process of human civilization had reached 2 nanometers. The central computer of the Yinghua spacecraft where Chen Yue resided housed thousands of CPUs manufactured with a 7-nanometer process. For chips, the lower the nanometer count of the manufacturing process, the more advanced the technology and the greater the computational power. This is because it means smaller electronic circuits and consequently more circuits can be integrated per unit area. The reason the Yinghua spacecraft did not adopt the most advanced process was for stability considerations. After all, it was a spaceship. A chip failure could not simply be replaced like on Earth. The encyclopedia in the central computer's database contained a complete set of chip manufacturing procedures. But for Chen Yue at this moment, manufacturing nanometer-scale chips was utterly out of the question. For this first chip development, Chen Yue was pragmatic and set his sights low. He set the chip process target at 6 micrometers or 6,000 nanometers. This process had been mastered by human civilization 60 or 70 years before its demise. Now Chen Yue intended to achieve this goal as a breakthrough. Even with such a realistic and modest target, Chen Yue was as cautious as if facing a formidable enemy, taking every step with extreme care. Chip manufacturing is an extremely complex set of processes. Chen Yue operated the 3D printer for manufacturing chip-making machines. Aside from some casings and larger parts that could be processed by intelligent machine tools, and Chen Yue's own developed equipment, slightly more precise devices had to be printed layer by layer using the 3D printer, because only the 3D printer could achieve the required precision. Chen Yue first built a high-precision silicon purification plant. Silicon, an element abundant both on Earth and on Amalthea, was plentiful. However, purifying it to an extremely high purity was no simple task. Beyond the purification plant were the slicing facility and a series of subsequent processing plants covering wet cleaning, lithography, photolithography, etching, as well as heat treatment, chemical vapor deposition, and a host of other processing steps. This meant at least a dozen factories. And this was the result of Chen Yue's relentless efforts to streamline production, adopting a customized model rather than specialized process-based production. For instance, in the chip processing, the chemicals needed for the wet cleaning step did not have a dedicated production plant. Instead, a single batch was custom produced by a chemical factory. This chip factory, covering only tens of thousands of square meters, consumed up to 50 of Chen Yue's compute. Apart from this chip factory, all construction tasks, whether railways, mines, metallurgical plants, or foundries, together consumed only about 10.6 of his computational power. This was the first time since arriving on Amalthea that Chen Yue had over 50 of his computational power occupied. At the chip factory, Chen Yue operated and built with meticulous care. Outside the chip factory, Chen Yue acted with boldness and grandeur, exuding the heroic spirit of changing the sky's color with a flick of his hand. Hundreds of kilometers of railways were laid without hesitation. A metallurgical plant capable of processing thousands of tons of copper ore daily was built on a whim. Time slipped away swiftly under these circumstances. In the blink of an eye, 3 years had passed. By now on Amalthea, the total mileage of railways built by Chen Yue had exceeded 3,000 kilometers, initially forming a pattern of 1 horizontal and 2 vertical lines connecting mines, processing plants, chemical plants, power plants, and a total of 36 factories or bases. At the chip factory, the time had come for Chen Yue's first actual manufacturing run. The tedious debugging process had concluded. At this moment, silicon ingots produced by the purification plant were sent into the processing facility. They would first be sliced into wafers, upon which circuits would then be etched to create chips. But trouble arose at the very first step. Chen Yue saw that due to insufficient processing precision, the wafers he cut were uneven in thickness, some parts thick, others thin. Although the precision deviation was only about 0.6, that still fell into the category of a major error. Damn. After inspection, finding no solution with the current process, Chen Yue had no choice but to grit his teeth and accept this situation. Regardless, he would continue manufacturing first. The wafers then proceeded to subsequent processing. Then Chen Yue discovered that the wet cleaning solution seemed to have been contaminated with something else. The precision was insufficient, and the processing could not meet his requirements. This was another error of about 1. Chen Yue gritted his teeth and began photolithography. Then another error appeared. Chen Yue's confidence was largely shattered. Struggling through all subsequent processes with compromises, Chen Yue was stunned when he tested the results. Of the first batch of about 1,000 chips manufactured, none met the initial design requirements. A yield rate of 0. Chen Yue was on the verge of tears. On Earth, this would land someone in prison. The result of a 0 yield rate deeply struck him. Among these 1,000 chips, as many as 850 were complete rejects, utterly unusable. Of the 150 usable ones, the best performing chip, as calculated by Chen Yue, could only achieve approximately the performance of chips from human civilization's 100 nanometer process. The rest barely reached the performance of 300 nanometer process chips. But, regardless, I have managed to produce chips. Chen Yue consoled himself. As long as I gradually improve, there will come a day when I surpass the technology of the human era. After completing the first batch of chips, Chen Yue summarized his experience, studied improvements, readjusted the machine parameters, and then commenced the production of the second batch. At this moment, Chen Yue had abandoned the originally planned 6,000 nanometer manufacturing process, aiming only to stably produce chips with a performance level of 100 nanometers. Those seemingly outdated 100 nanometer chips could still play a significant role, as many areas in the industrial sector simply did not require such advanced chips. For instance, some control chips at the bottom layer of machinery might only need to receive a command and execute simple actions like extending, retracting, or moving a robotic arm left or right. How complex could such chips be? Even 1000 nanometer chips were more than sufficient. Yet now Chen Yue had to apply the high-performance chips collected from the Mars base here, because beyond these he had none others. If he could manufacture stable and reliable 1000 nanometer chips, he could replace all those high-performance chips and repurpose them for more critical applications. In fact, recently Chen Yue had voluntarily slowed down the production rate of robots due to insufficient chip reserves. According to Chen Yue's estimates, once the 1000 nanometer chips were produced stably, they could replace at least 1/10 of the total chips currently in use within his industrial circle. This was a substantial number and could play a crucial role. After adjustments for the second batch of 1,000 chips, when the yield standard was recalibrated to meet the performance of 1000 nanometer chips, though the process remained the original 6,000 nanometers, the performance only reached that of 100 nanometers. The yield finally rose from a pitiful, ironically 0% to 550 chips met the standard. Chen Yue continued to refine research and adjust. After 2 years of repeated efforts, he ultimately stabilized the yield at 55. This was the limit. Due to inherent instrument flaws, the yield could not be increased further. Over these 2 years, Chen Yue produced approximately 200 chips that met the standard, gradually replacing them in various machines and robots to observe their performance and provide data for subsequent iterations. Once the yield stabilized, Chen Yue began to increase production. Simultaneously, the construction of a second chip production line commenced. This second line was a brand new design based on the experience and foundation of the first. Over the past 2 years, Chen Yue's industrial base had also grown. Various factories had gradually spun off from the original customized general-purpose factories specializing in dedicated production, such as dedicated wire factories, tool factories, sulfuric acid plants, and ethylene plants. Previously, factories like those for wires and tools involving metals were all the same facility. The multifunctional casting machines produced both wires and tools, resulting in low efficiency. Now things were different. The growth of the industrial base gave Chen Yue more confidence, providing him with ample assurance to build the second chip production line. A new process, silicon purification plant, a new process, wet cleaning system, and a newly developed lithography machine. By the time the second chip production line was completed, the first line had achieved a weekly output of 100 chips, with a yield fluctuating between 50 and 55. The second line started with an output of 100 chips, still using the 6,000 nanometer process. But this time, Chen Yue no longer had to lower the standard to measure yield. In the first trial production among the 100 chips, the yield measured by the 6,000 nanometer process performance reached 12. This meant that every week Chen Yue could independently produce 100 chips with the 6,000 nanometer. It also meant that every week up to 100 high-performance chips could be replaced and installed in more critical locations. And this was only the early stage of production. Chen Yue was confident that after at most 2 years of debugging, the second line could achieve a weekly output of 100 chips with a yield of 40. That would mean a weekly production of 4000 chips. The ample supply of chips completely freed Chen Yue from constraints, allowing him to go all out in producing robots and equipment without worrying about chip shortages. Thus, the previously suppressed robot production capacity was fully unleashed. With nearly 100 robots already in existence, production reached an average of 700 robots per day. These newly produced robots were continuously supplied to the construction frontline. The overburdened robots finally had a chance to rest and undergo comprehensive overhauls at the hospital. At the same time, construction progress on all fronts began to accelerate rapidly. By now, the railway network Chen Yue had built on Amalthea had expanded from the initial 1 horizontal and 2 vertical lines to 3 rings and 4 verticals. Centered around the Yinghua spacecraft, there were 3 ring lines at distances of approximately 50, 160, and 280 kilometers. Within these 3 ring lines, 4 vertical railways connected the inner and outer areas. The railway network also included numerous branch lines extending to every mine and every factory. The total railway length had now reached 700 kilometers. Over 200 trains raced along these tracks day and night. They transported steel ingots, copper ingots, aluminum ingots to corresponding foundries and processing plants, moved processed parts to assembly plants, delivered large amounts of solid oxygen to power plants, or carried countless rails to the end of the railway lines. Chen Yue observed that as his industrial strength grew with increasing factory numbers and production capacity, the environment of the entire Amalthea was also affected by his actions. At present, Amalthea even had a thin atmosphere. For a small celestial body like Amalthea, having an atmosphere was laughable. Even if by some coincidence it passed through a region rich in interstellar gas and gained a slight atmosphere, it would be like an honest man marrying a fairy, impossible to keep. Interstellar radiation and Jupiter's radiation would relentlessly strip away the atmosphere at a rapid. Yet Chen Yue discovered that Amalthea's atmosphere was actually thickening. Its surface atmospheric pressure had reached 1/70,000th of Earth's atmospheric pressure. This was even greater than Pluto's atmosphere. Considering its mass was far smaller than Pluto's, Chen Yue looked at the power plant spewing endless billowing smoke, then at the ceaselessly operating steel and metallurgical plants, lost in thought. An atmosphere is fine, as long as it doesn't get too thick. The atmosphere is utterly vital to life and plays an extremely crucial role in ecological. If Earth had no atmosphere, what would it be like? It's foreseeable that life would never have emerged on the planet. Liquid water could not be retained as it would be completely evaporated by solar radiation. The surface would be a scorched wasteland with temperatures soaring to hundreds of degrees Celsius during the day and plummeting to -200 degrees at night. The atmosphere is so important, but for Chen Yue it meant a bit of trouble. Initially, it was because Amalthea had no atmosphere that Chen Yue chose to land the Yinghua spacecraft there. This ever-thickening atmosphere stirred a trace of concern within him. For at this moment, he had already begun to plan the development of his own aerospace industry. Chen Yue was always keenly aware that Amalthea was merely the starting point of his expansion. Once he grew and prospered, he would surely leave it and shift his focus to other planets. Amalthea was too small to bear the weight of Chen Yu's dreams. To fulfill his dream of growth and space exploration, he had to develop the aerospace industry. The ultimate goal of that industry was to build larger, more advanced spacecraft. Ships even more advanced than the Yinghua. It should be fine, Chen Yue comforted himself. Before I move away from Amalthea, its atmosphere probably won't thicken enough to cause me any trouble. However, this served as a reminder, making him realize that the aerospace industry must commence as soon as possible. So, first let's launch a few satellites. The satellites originally salvaged from Mars had been in orbit for over a decade. Under the influence of Jupiter's radiation, 9 of them had completely failed, losing all functionality. The remaining operational ones were battered and on the verge of being scrapped. They could barely function at less than 10. Among these satellites, Chen Yue had ceased using those for resource exploration and terrain mapping. However, communication satellites were an absolute necessity. He couldn't do without them. Again, it was because Amalthea was too small. At a distance of just a few hundred kilometers, the planet's curvature increased to the point where radio communication became impossible. To communicate, he either had to lay communication cables or rely on communication satellite relays. Frankly speaking, Chen Yue couldn't yet mass-produce communication cables. He could only fabricate a tiny amount in the lab, using it in the most critical places at best. So communication satellites were the only option. Then he'll develop rockets, Chen Yue thought to himself. Thus, within the 3-ring-4 vertical railway network, Chen Yue selected a location, mobilized a large number of robots, and immediately began factory construction. This time Chen Yue was ambitious. He aimed not just to build rockets, but to make them reusable and dual-purpose for both space and near-Earth flight. That is capable of operating both in the space environment and flying in near-Earth space. For fuel, Chen Yue planned to use liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen. These were easy to produce, unlike the complex, unsymmetrical dimethylhydrazine. Amalthea had abundant water ice, which could be prepared through direct electrolysis. The electronic control system was complex, but after incorporating some high-performance chips from the Mars base, it was also resolved. What remained was material performance. There was indeed a challenge, but only one: the high-temperature resistance of the rocket nozzle material. Chen Yue had to ensure that the intense heat from the burning liquid hydrogen and oxygen exhaust did not melt the metal of the nozzle. Apart from this difficulty, the challenges of launching rockets on Earth, such as vibration resistance, structural strength, thermal tiles, and communication, were entirely absent. This was how convenient it was to launch rockets from a small, atmosphereless moon like Amalthea. To obtain high-performance, heat-resistant materials, Chen Yue had to embark on scientific research. The database contained formulas for heat-resistant materials, but unfortunately Chen Yu's current industrial capabilities were insufficient to produce them. He had to find a way to develop materials that his present industry could manufacture. To this end, Chen Yue had to establish a materials research institute, allocating substantial computing power, robots, and equipment to begin development. After 3 months of research, Chen Yue ultimately gave up. He had to admit that with his current technological level, it was impossible to create the ideal material he had envisioned. What to do then? After pondering for a moment, Chen Yue had to reduce the thrust of the rocket in his design. If the material couldn't withstand the heat, then he would lower the rate of heat generation. A lower heat generation rate meant less heat. Combined with existing cooling devices, the temperature should be manageable, preventing the material from melting. Having solved this problem, subsequent development proceeded much faster. Within a month, a prototype was complete. This first rocket, manufactured by Chen Yue himself, was named the Mu-5 type. The Mu-5 rocket was not shaped like an Earth rocket. It wasn't even cylindrical. Its form resembled a square table about 2 meters on each side, with 4 short legs serving as thruster chambers. The thicker tabletop housed the necessary instruments and equipment, communication devices, attitude control systems, fuel storage tanks, electronic controls, and cooling systems. Its top was empty. When launching a satellite, it was simply tied to the top with ropes. This shape completely defied aerodynamic principles. On Earth, it couldn't even get off the ground. But on Amalthea, there was no air. Well, now there was a little, but it still didn't. At that moment, the liquid hydrogen and oxygen had been fully loaded. After a final check, Chen Yue gave the order, and the rocket ignited. The hydrogen-oxygen flame shot out from beneath its 4 legs, propelling it slowly upward. Its speed was not fast, unlike the rapid acceleration of Earth rockets, because its thrust wasn't very strong. At maximum power, it could only achieve 3 ms². To reach an orbit about 10 kilometers above Amalthea's surface, it would take approximately 82 seconds. At that point, it would have an orbital velocity of about 40 meters per second, enough to remain stable in orbit around Amalthea. If it carried a satellite, simply untying the rope would allow the satellite to orbit on its own. It was that, compared to the complex procedures and various sophisticated equipment required to launch a satellite on Earth, it was ridiculously easy. Even Chen Yue himself was inwardly mocking it. But, as long as it worked, that was enough. And it should work well. At this moment, this table-shaped rocket flew slowly into the sky, leisurely circled Amalthea twice, then flew back, just as slowly, and landed at its original spot. In Chen Yu's memory, it was only a little over 20 years before Earth's explosion and the extinction of human civilization that humanity had finally mastered the relatively mature technology of rocket recovery. That is, after launching payloads like satellites or spacecraft, the rocket could return to the ground on its own and be reused after inspection and maintenance. This technology drastically reduced launch costs, providing greater convenience for humanity's ventures into space. Even the manned Mars landing plan of the Inghua spacecraft was only proposed after the maturity of reusable rocket technology. The importance of this technology was self-evident. To master this technology, human civilization endured countless hardships, witnessed the crash and explosion of numerous rockets, expended the painstaking efforts of scientists and engineers, and consumed vast amounts of funds and time before finally succeeding. Yet on Amalthea, for Chen Yue, this technology was remarkably simple. So simple that with his rudimentary aerospace technology at the time, he directly mastered reusable rocket technology upon launching his very first rocket. This was also because Amalthea was too small and had almost no atmosphere. The difficulty of mastering this technology, there was countless times easier than on Earth. At this moment, the table-shaped movie rocket landed steadily on the launch site. The waiting robots swarmed forward, thrusting various equipment and instruments at it for a comprehensive inspection from the inside out. The inspection results were quite satisfactory to Chen Yue. This launch had caused no damage to it. At this point, it only needed to be refueled to perform a second flight, without even requiring major repairs. Thus, a train departed from Chen Yue's newly built satellite factory, carrying a satellite he had just manufactured. This satellite was square in shape, with a volume of less than 1 cubic meter and a mass of 1.7 tons. Among this weight, about 600 kilograms were liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen. Under the control of a controller, they would slowly begin to combust, driving a generator to produce electricity for powering related instruments. This was another stark difference from Earth. Satellites on Earth either used solar panels for power or nuclear. Using chemical fuel for power was simply too wasteful. Chemical fuel had too low an energy density, and in Earth's orbit, it was inconvenient to refuel satellites. This meant that once the fuel ran out, which wouldn't take long, the satellite would have to be scrapped. But here on Amalthea, the environmental conditions were exactly the opposite. Here, sunlight was too weak for solar panels to be practical, and Chen Yue had yet to master nuclear fission battery tech. On the other hand, chemical fuel power technology was mature, and refueling with chemical fuel here was very convenient. At worst, the movie rocket could simply go up to space again, which was effortless. Thus, this situation came about. Moreover, this satellite, though called a satellite and seemingly high-tech, was essentially just a signal amplifier operating in space with no real technical sophistication. Even the Ising Triton solid oxygen power plant had more technical content than this thing. Consequently, this satellite was tied to the movie rocket with steel cables. Indeed, steel cables, much like how logs are bound on a truck, securely lashing the satellite to the rocket. Igniting once more, the movie rocket ascended again, smoothly delivering it into Amalthea's orbit. The next moment, Chen Yue immediately noticed that the communication quality with his distant factories, bases, and robots had improved several-fold. Commanding them became much more seamless. Not bad. Chen Yue pressed on, launching several dozen more satellites, achieving full signal coverage over Amalthea. Now he no longer had to worry about robots losing track of their master. With this shortcoming resolved, Chen Yue once again focused his energy on the ongoing large-scale construction. Time slipped away quietly, and decades passed in the blink of an eye. For an ordinary person, it might evoke a sense of vicissitude, as a babbling infant could have turned into a gray-haired elder. But Chen Yue felt nothing of the sort. A few decades were but a fleeting moment for him. As long as his computer remained intact, he possessed infinite lifespan. It was now the 76th year of the new calendar. Chen Yue had set the moment of his arrival on Amalthea as year 1, 0 hours and 0 minutes. He then adopted the same timekeeping system as on Earth, 24 hours per day, 60 minutes per hour, and 60 seconds per minute. At this moment, it was exactly 0 hours and 0 minutes of the 76th year of the new calendar. The new year had just passed. Deeply engrossed in his work, Chen Yue did not hold any New Year celebrations. The continuous development of his industrial base merely led him to conduct a self-assessment at this New Year moment, treating it as a form of commemoration. After 76 years of relentless day and night development and painstaking effort, the number of robots under Chen Yue's command had surged to an astonishing 20 million units. The total railway mileage had reached 190 kilometers, forming a comprehensive layout of 11 horizontal and 8 vertical lines spanning the entire globe of Amalthea, connecting all major factories, mines, and bases. At this point, the total number of various types of factories, including power plants, mines, chemical plants, foundries, machinery plants, vehicle assembly plants, robot assembly plants, and wafer fabs, had exceeded 700, with an annual power consumption surpassing 100 billion kilowatt-hours. The entire Amalthea had been transformed. It was no longer desolate or lifeless. Heavy loaded trains rumbled across the land at all times, and vast numbers of robots scurried about like ants. Under the glow of lights, the land was brilliantly illuminated. Countless factories stood like a steel jungle showcasing the power of technology. Notably, after decades of uninterrupted research and development and massive resource investment, the semiconductor process, most crucial to Chen Yue, had advanced to the point of mass-producing 130-nanometer chips. Although the 130-nanometer chip process still lagged about 50 years behind the time of humanity's extinction, it was already immensely useful to Chen Yue. At the very least, the chips used in his robots were now fully adequate. After all, the robots under Chen Yue's command did not need to perform intelligent calculations, they only needed to receive his commands. It was for this reason that Chen Yue was able to increase the number of robots to over 20 million and the number of factories to over 700. Otherwise, relying solely on the chips scavenged from the Mars base, there wouldn't even be enough for one chip per robot. Chen Yue felt that his development of Amalthea had reached a turning point. The time had come for new goals and directions. At this moment, Chen Yue realized that his development of Jupiter V had reached a limit in scale. After all, the size of Jupiter V was fixed and its mineral and resource reserves were finite. According to the previous plan, it was now time to shift from pursuing scale to pursuing quality. Chen Yue needed more precise processing capabilities, more powerful machines equipment with higher reliability, but lower energy consumption, faster transportation speeds, and swifter computational power. Of course, this shift in goals did not mean that past efforts were in vain. Chen Yue was acutely aware of this. He knew that the prerequisite for pursuing quality was first achieving sufficient scale. Without scale, everything was a castle in the air. That was precisely why in the preceding decades he had pushed forward with such urgency, expanding his industrial scale to cover the entire planet at the fastest possible pace. With this scale, he now finally had the qualifications to pursue quality. Thus, after the new year of year 76 of the new calendar, Chen Yue's development model underwent a sudden transformation. Large-scale construction came to a halt. From this point onward, Chen Yue would essentially cease building new factories or extending railway lines. In their place came gradual iteration and incremental upgrades. Take the power plant, for instance. In the past, 2 kilograms of isotorin and the corresponding oxygen combustion might generate 1 kilowatt of electricity. But now Chen Yue pursued higher thermal efficiency. He began to find ways to improve the utilization rate of heat energy, striving to achieve 1 kilowatt with 1.9 kilograms, or even 1.817, and ultimately 1 kilogram of isotorin. The previous crude management style and the Makido mentality where anything functional was acceptable and everything else irrelevant were completely abandoned at this moment. Chen Yue began to strive for perfection and nitpick over details. What? This component could reduce precision by 1/10 a santh. That's unusable. Immediately research and manufacture a component with higher performance. This component only has a reliable working life of 9,000 hours. A component made with a different process could increase reliable working time by 10, but energy consumption rises by 60. First, improve the reliable working time. Energy consumption. Find a way to reduce it. With even the slightest improvement or breakthrough under Chen Yue's exceptionally high execution ability, this new technology would immediately be applied across all industrial scenarios. This might be merely a 0.01 increase in efficiency, yet the cost increase could be as high as 10. But Chen Yue did not care. 1 time is a 0.01 improvement. 100 times is a 1 improvement. 10,000 times is a doubling. 100,000 improvements represent a complete technological disruption, a leap in craftsmanship and technology. Throughout human civilization, every major technological leap has been built upon countless small accumulations of technology. Now Chen Yue had embarked on this same path. He knew that to realize his dream of exploring the universe and rejuvenating humanity, this step was indispensable. As Chen Yue pursued perfection relentlessly, the once chaotic and scattered industrial facilities gradually became orderly. They acquired beautiful factory buildings with exteriors that looked highly advanced. Inside the factories, there were no longer messy wires, tools scattered everywhere, or bulky, clumsy robots. Instead, they were replaced by near-vacuum environments and uniform, orderly machines. A large number of old machines were melted down and recast into steel ingots and aluminum plates, which were then processed by upgraded foundries into new higher-performance components. Countless railway tracks were directly dismantled and remelted. The newly laid tracks were more robust, more stable, and less prone to deformation, allowing trains to pass at higher speeds. Countless robots autonomously returned to recycling stations where they were disassembled into individual parts. On the new robot production lines, numerous new robots were produced in sequence. Compared to their predecessors, they consumed less energy, were more agile, had higher reliability, and the time, energy, and cost required to produce them had significantly decreased. On another front, Chen Yue's industrial capabilities once again began to surge forward. Amidst this process, Chen Yue gradually sensed that his computational power was becoming insufficient. The utilization rate of the central computer aboard the spacecraft Yinghua had consistently remained above 90. Occasionally, during major scientific research tasks, the rate would spike to over 95. This was, of course, due to Chen Yue's pursuit of industrial upgrading. The research and development of numerous new processes and technologies consumed too much of his computational power. Yet this was something he had to do. I must find a way to increase computational power. Without enough computing capacity, technology cannot advance. After a century of abundant computational power, as the threat of insufficient computing power first began to show its signs, Chen Yue was finally forced to consider how to solve this problem. First of all, the option of manufacturing more advanced computers for his own use could be ruled out without hesitation. This was simply impossible. Even though industrial upgrading had been underway for over a decade, the most advanced chips Chen Yue could produce had only advanced from a 130-nanometer process to 65 nanometers. This rate of progress was already fast enough, but the 65-nanometer process was still at least 20 years behind the 7-nanometer process of the central computer aboard the Yinghua spacecraft, where he currently resided. He didn't yet know how many iterations and improvements were needed to reach the 7-nanometer level. Secondly, the chips scavenged from the Mars base were also unusable, because they were already in use. Chen Yue had deployed them in key nodes of his industrial facilities where they played crucial. They simply could not be dismantled and repurposed. So, what to do? It's time to reclaim computing power, Chen Yue thought silently. At this stage, Chen Yue's perception extended to every endpoint of all his industrial facilities. Every movement of every robot, every turn of every track, every change of direction of every train. All were personally commanded and operated by Chen Yue. This brought about an ultimate improvement in efficiency and coordination. There was never any error in cooperation between machines. No waste or mistakes occurred. Now Chen Yue intended to reclaim all this computational power. That is, he would relinquish full control over the endpoints of industrial facilities and delegate authority to the underlying chips for autonomous control. This would inevitably lead to a certain degree of reduction in efficiency and coordination. But to reclaim computational power for more important tasks, the loss in efficiency and coordination had to be temporarily disregarded. Still, there's not enough computing power, Chen Yue sighed silently. If only I had sufficient computing power. Chen Yue ardently yearned for access to more advanced supercomputers. With sufficient computational power, he would even dare to venture into the realm of fundamental physics research at his current stage. Fundamental physics unveils the most underlying operational laws of the universe, addressing the most essential questions. What is the fundamental composition of the universe? Where did the universe come from? Where is it going? Why do stars burn in this manner? Why is the universe the way it is? And so forth. Fundamental physics serves as the cornerstone for all scientific and technological development, possessing unparalleled significance. Corresponding to it is applied physics. Applied physics is more closely related to everyday life, encompassing matters such as how to make this machine more fuel efficient or how to improve precision, all falling within its domain. Fundamental physics determines the ceiling of applied physics. The technological level of applied physics can never surpass the research level of fundamental physics. Just as without the discovery of relativity, the atomic bomb and hydrogen bomb could never have been built. As crucial as fundamental physics is, the resources required for its research are equally staggering. In the Earth era, for instance, the particle colliders built to study the most minute structures of matter cost at least tens of billions each. Facilities like neutrino telescopes had to be constructed hundreds of meters underground with costs so immense that ordinary people could scarcely fathom them. Yet for Chen Yue at this moment, with sufficient computational power, none of this would be an issue. He dared to delve into fundamental physics even at his current stage of development. The only problem was the lack of computational power. Sighing inwardly, Chen Yue proceeded with his computational power recovery work. Thus, extensive permissions were granted to the basic chips and numerous instructions and instruction sets were deployed onto those chips. From now on, less critical and overly minute decisions no longer required his intervention. The underlying chips would make decisions based on preset conditions. Consequently, the ultimate coordination and efficiency within Chen Yue's industrial world were disrupted. Train arrival times occasionally deviated slightly, necessitating greater tolerance in scheduling, which led to a marginal drop in efficiency. On the robot production line, the defect rate saw a minor increase. At the power plant, average energy consumption rose slightly, and at the steel mill, production efficiency dipped somewhat. Chen Yue observed all this, but could only endure it. With this delegation of authority, Chen Yue reclaimed approximately 30 of his computational power. This power was then funneled entirely into research institutions where experiments in various laboratories became increasingly frequent. Technological progress advanced slowly through these repeated experiments. Under these circumstances, Chen Yue's industrial strength once again began to grow rapidly. Yet this growth did not last long. In May of the 102nd year of the new calendar, the first case of mineral depletion occurred on Amalthea. Mine 1506 was a zinc sulfide mine. The zinc reserves there were low or quality poor and extraction difficult. Nonetheless, this mine still held a relatively important position in Chen Yue's industrial system. Chen Yue did not particularly value the amount of zinc it could produce. There were over a dozen other mines on Amalthea capable of extracting sufficient zinc for his needs. What Chen Yue valued most was the rare element associated with zinc sulfide gallium. This rare element could be used to manufacture alloys and produce semiconductors. For over a century, Chen Yue had been steadily extracting gallium from this site. But now it was depleted. Although several other mines could still supply gallium, this was an ominous sign. If this continues, more and more mines will be exhausted and lose their extraction value, Chen Yue mused silently. Amalthea is after all too small. In truth, it was already an immense stroke of luck to find virtually all the elements he needed on Amalthea. Chen Yue could not ask for more. Then I'll have to mine from other celestial bodies. Fortunately, my aerospace industry now has a certain foundation. Aware of this looming threat, Chen Yue promptly initiated a space program. He first launched several hundred satellites into space. These satellites were not intended for observing Amalthea. He planned to deploy these satellites to orbit other moons of Jupiter to survey whether they contained the gallium he needed. This day has finally come. Chen Yue felt a mix of emotion and excitement. Ever since landing on Amalthea, he had known that his reach could not be confined to this one moon alone. It was too small. Only by spreading his industrial facilities across multiple planets supported by their resources could his industry thrive and expand. Then let's take the first step starting now. Based on their proximity to Amalthea, Chen Yue began selecting targets. The 4 large Galilean moons were immediately ruled out. Though they were enormous and rich in minerals, with one alone providing Chen Yue with inexhaustible resources. They had one major drawback: they were too large. They possessed immense gravity and, relatively speaking, extremely thick atmospheres. At Chen Yue's current level of aerospace technology, he could not even manage to land rockets or spacecraft on them. The only viable targets were moons like Amalthea, or even smaller ones. Under these circumstances, the hundreds of satellites escorted by Wood-5 type rockets departed along different trajectories toward 5 distinct Jovian moons: Jupiter, XIV, XV, 16, 18, and 6. Simultaneously, to ensure communication between these different moons, Chen Yue also launched some Jupiter-orbiting satellites. These satellites did not orbit the Jovian moons, but directly orbited Jupiter itself. Positioned in different orbits, they ensured that no matter where Amalthea was located, reliable communication could be maintained with other Jovian moons at various positions. The vast firmament, the endless starry river. Hundreds of tiny satellites flew, and under Chen Yue's remote control, they successfully entered orbits around their respective moons. Observation commenced. In the first year, Chen Yue found nothing. The probes had only discovered common resources on those moons of little value. Such large moons, yet so barren of minerals, Chen Yue grumbled. If it comes to it, I'll have to look at more distant moons. In the second year, one-day data transmitted back by a group of satellites made Chen Yue's spirits soar. This appears to be a bauxite vein. Bauxite deposits typically also contain gallium. Chen Yue's heart swelled with exhilaration. Ever since discovering signs of mineral depletion, he had been forced to deliberately slow down construction to conserve resources. This felt like being shackled, a deeply uncomfortable sensation. Now the discovery of a new vein instantly dissolved the weight in his heart. I knew it. Heaven never seals off all roads. Chen Yue's gaze immediately turned to his aerospace launch center. There, the newly developed Mu-7 interstellar transport ship stood ready for departure. The Mu-7 spacecraft was developed based on the Mu-5 rocket. It was larger in volume, possessed greater thrust, and its transport capacity had correspondingly seen a massive enhancement. It was also a dual-use aerospace vehicle capable of taking off and landing directly on a planet's surface, as well as flying through space. However, given its current form, calling it a rocket no longer seemed appropriate, so Chen Yue simply dubbed it a spaceship. Then Interstellar Expeditionary Force set forth. Chen Yue immediately issued the command. A vast number of mining robots, already prepared beforehand, marched in orderly ranks like a majestic army, departing from the robot warehouse and boarding one Mu-7 spaceship after another. The stream of robots was endless, accompanied by numerous excavators, mining carts, crushers, generators, and construction materials. The multitude of supplies and robots converged, forming a veritable ocean. Pity there's no music, Chen Yue mused. Such a colossal army was about to embark on a distant expedition. If accompanied by stirring military music, the spectacle would have been magnificent. One Mu-7 spaceship was filled with robots, approximately 300 of them. At Chen Yue's command, powerful flames immediately erupted from beneath the ship, lifting it slowly skyward and propelling it swiftly toward a designated direction. Over 200,000 kilometers away lay the planet where Chen Yue had discovered bauxite, the location of Jupiter's Moon 14. After a period of acceleration, the Mu-7 entered a coasting phase. Within the complex gravitational environment of the Jupiter system, it followed a precalculated trajectory, precisely navigating toward Jupiter 14. Behind it, hundreds of kilometers away, followed the second Mu-7 spaceship. Then came the third, the fourth. A full 100 ships laden with over 10,000 robots and a variety of equipment. At that moment, this route had truly become an interstellar highway. After a week of flight, the first ship finally reached Jupiter 14. Jupiter 14 was a planet even smaller than Jupiter V. Its mass was only about 1/5 that of Jupiter V, its escape velocity a mere 40 meters per second, and its surface gravity a scant 2 millimeters per second squared. Since the Mu-7 could land on Jupiter V, landing on this moon was naturally even less problematic. Thus, under Chen Yue's control, the ship adjusted its attitude and touched down upon its surface. The spaceship's hatch opened, and over 300 robots filed out. What greeted Chen Yue was an even more desolate world, a small, irregularly ellipsoidal planet. Its surface was also predominantly dark red, covered with numerous impact craters, even more than on Jupiter V. This is the first planet I've landed on besides Jupiter V. A flicker of emotion stirred within Chen Yue. From now on, this will be my second industrial base. Jupiter XIV shall also become the second industrial star of human civilization. With a sense of ceremony, a robot planted a red flag upon the dark red, barren, and lifeless surface of Jupiter XIV, declaring Chen Yue's sovereignty over this place. Mu-7 spaceship number 1 took off again, beginning its return to Jupiter V. The 300 robots marched onward with imposing strides toward Bauxite Mine 11. From this moment on, Chen Yue decided to prefix all mine sites on Jupiter V with 0, and those on Jupiter 14 with 1. The designation 11 signified that it was the first mine on Jupiter 14. Shortly after the first batch of robots departed, Mu-7 spaceship number 2 landed, releasing another 300 robots. Following them came a variety of machinery, vehicles, and tools. Some other spaceships landed in different locations where deposits of water ice and solid oxygen had been identified. Chen Yue planned to build a power station here. Jupiter 14 clearly needed its own power generation capability. It was too far from Jupiter V to receive a power supply from there. Of course, the mine supporting facilities had to be built near the bauxite deposit. Thus, a high-voltage transmission line needed to be constructed between the two sites. With the aid of various tools, the total of over 10,000 robots commenced new construction activities. Tools and manpower from the home base on Jupiter V arrived continuously, while Jupiter 14 underwent rapid transformation. The power plant and the mine grew as swiftly as bamboo shoots after rain. In just half a year, they were officially operational. Gallium is a rare metal. Though important, Chen Yue's consumption was not substantial. About 100 tons per year sufficed, which was the capacity of a single Mu-7 trip. However, this was a bauxite deposit. Typically, gallium is extracted as a byproduct of aluminum mining. Here, the situation was reversed. Chen Yue mined gallium and extracted aluminum as a byproduct. Jupiter V was not lacking in aluminum, but it wasn't exactly abundant either. Conveniently, he could transport the aluminum ore from Jupiter 14 as well. Finally, no shortage of gallium. Chen Yue sighed with relief, reviving several previously suspended plans and resuming construction. Traffic between the two planets increased. Mu-7 spaceships shuttled back and forth, transporting vast quantities of minerals from Jupiter 14 and bringing over numerous robots and machinery from Jupiter V. Indeed, a single power plant and one mine could not satisfy Chen Yue's ambitions. Having started on Jupiter XIV, he intended to develop it entirely. After all, Jupiter V was also not rich in gallium, other rare elements, or metals like copper and tin. If you're going to play big, Chen Yue resolved. I must make the title of second industrial star truly deserved. Subsequently, more interstellar expeditionary forces arrived on Jupiter 14 via Mu-7 spaceships, along with additional construction materials and equipment. The once barren and lifeless Jupiter XIV under Chen Yue's interstellar expedition plan finally began to show signs of bustling activity. But at this juncture, a problem that had been tolerable and could be temporarily ignored now grew increasingly unavoidable as the scale of development on Jupiter 14 expanded, presenting itself before Chen Yue. Communication latency. As is well known, light is the fastest entity in the universe, traveling at approximately 300 kilometers per second. Radio waves used in wireless communication are also a form of light, albeit with lower energy. Their propagation speed is also the speed of light. Generally speaking, communication at light speed is more than sufficient given its incredible velocity. It can circle the Earth 7.5 times in a single second. But now in the interstellar era, Chen Yue, who is simultaneously developing two planets, finds light speed too slow for his needs. The orbital speeds of Jupiter's moons Amalthea and Callisto differ. The closest distance between them is merely a few thousand kilometers, while at their farthest they lie on opposite sides of Jupiter, increasing the distance to nearly 400 kilometers. A distance of 400 kilometers means a round trip of 800 kilometers. Even transmitting information at light speed would require approximately 2.67 seconds. That is when the two moons are at their farthest apart. Chen Yue would have to endure a delay of a full 2.67 seconds to receive a reply after sending a signal to Callisto. This communication lag is simply unacceptable. With such a delay, how could he operate the instruments and vehicles? How could he keep the factories running? If the industrial scale were small, automated equipment might barely suffice. But now that the scale has expanded, complexity has skyrocketed, especially with the coordination between different systems and factories, making it exceedingly difficult. Chen Yue racked his brains, but found no solution to this problem, unless he relocated to Callisto and personally oversaw operations there. But then Amalthea would face the same issue. Developing multiple planets was a strategy Chen Yue had set from the beginning, and he could not change it. Alas, there's no choice but to do this, Chen Yue sighed. He desperately longed for superluminal communication technology that could transmit information faster than light, so he would no longer have to worry about communication delays. Unfortunately, even human civilization at its peak was far from achieving superluminal communication, let alone Chen Yue at present. For now, all he could do was find a compromise to address the current situation. Build a supercomputing center. A supercomputing center, as the name implies, is a facility housing a supercomputer, a system that connects a massive number of computing chips to achieve extremely high computational power. The computer Chen Yue inhabited aboard the spacecraft Yinghua was also a supercomputer, albeit a small one. In the Earth era, large supercomputers could occupy an entire building and consume as much electricity as a small city. They were indispensable tools for scientific research. Without supercomputers, fields such as materials science, mathematics, physics, and pharmacology would struggle to advance. Now Chen Yue had achieved stable mass production of chips using a 65-nanometer process, while research on the more advanced 45-nanometer process was ongoing. By analogy, chips made with the 65-nanometer process were roughly equivalent in performance to those used in high-end home computers around the year 2010. Chen Yue looked down on these chips. Building a supercomputer with them felt like constructing a palace with mud bricks. One was too grand, the other too crude. But there was no choice, he had to make do for now. So a large number of chips were transported to Callisto, where construction of a semi-underground supercomputing center had begun. The most critical aspect of a supercomputing center is heat dissipation. Some chips even need to be immersed in low-temperature liquids to function properly. For this center, Chen Yue adopted water cooling technology. Callisto's temperature is extremely low, reaching minus 200 degrees Celsius. Chen Yue dug numerous channels around the center and laid many pipes. Once the center was built, the heat generated by the chips would be carried away by water in the pipes, transferred to Callisto's soil, and then cooled water would return to the center to absorb more heat, completing a cycle. For this supercomputing center, Chen Yue invested tens of thousands of the most advanced chips available, laid complex wiring, and built numerous auxiliary facilities. To power the supercomputer, he had to construct a dedicated power plant and a railway to supply it with energy. On the software side, Chen Yue had to devote enormous effort to writing a system-level program to coordinate the tens of thousands of chips, as well as an intelligent program to automatically process massive amounts of data from all over the planet. Thus, with a combination of hardware and software, the supercomputing center could partially replace him. After a year of hard work, the center, covering dozens of acres, was finally completed. Overall, the total computing power of this center was about 0.8 of that of the central computer aboard the Yinghua spacecraft. Yet its volume was 100 times larger and its energy consumption 1,000 times higher. Such was the staggering gap in technological advancement. They'll have to make do, Chen Yue thought. With his command, a low hum arose as the system was finally activated. The intelligent program designed to replace him began to run. Through data pathways already connected, a torrent of data surged in, and the intelligent program and supercomputing center immediately entered full power operation. Chen Yue observed its performance. He saw numerous robots under the center's command moving in an orderly fashion. Some robots processed a mold through one step and passed it to the next, where another robot took over and continued processing. A heavy load train rumbled forward under the center's scheduling, while another train sped toward it from the opposite direction. The first train slowed slightly to arrive at the intersection later, thus avoiding a collision. In the power plant, 30 generators, each with a capacity of 1.0 kilowatts, roared into operation. Outside the plant, massive machines delivered solid oxygen and ice to the pretreatment workshop. A vast factory based on production demands entered low power mode. Correspondingly, one generator in the power plant switched to idle mode, reducing output. Everything appeared. Moreover, all these facilities operated fully automatically under the control of the supercomputing center. All Chen Yue had to do was assign subsequent tasks every hour, check its operational status every few seconds, and fix any errors. This still consumed a significant amount of his computational power, but it was a straight 80 reduction compared to before. Not bad, not bad. I've finally freed up some capacity, he thought. Chen Yue was quite satisfied with this outcome. Overall, Chen Yue was fairly satisfied, though there were still some imperfections in the details. Under the command of this supercomputer, the overall error rate of the industrial facilities on Jupiter 14 reached approximately 12. That is, about 12 of total societal resources were wasted. These total resources included not only material ones, such as parts and minerals, but also energy resources like electricity and heat, as well as time resources, among others. On Jupiter V, when Chen Yue had previously managed everything personally down to the smallest detail, the overall error rate had been merely around 0.25. This was nearly the limit. The reason it could not reach 0 was that certain factors beyond Chen Yue's full control, such as radiation caused by Jupiter's activity and asteroid impacts, were unavoidable. After Chen Yue delegated authority to the underlying chips, the overall error rate on Jupiter V soared to approximately 2.6. On Jupiter XIV, with the construction of a supercomputing center where intelligent programs replaced his direct command of numerous industrial facilities, the overall error rate again skyrocketed to 12. Yet there was no alternative. For now, this was the best that could be achieved. Although the 12 overall error rate seemed high, it depended on the standard of comparison. By Chen Yue's evaluation, the overall error rate before the fall of human civilization had been as high as 96.5. That is 96.5 of all societal resources were wasted, leaving only a mere 3.5 applied to production. The reason for such a high error rate in Chen Yue's view was that sleeping wasted time, eating wasted time, not to mention the widespread waste of food. Watching movies wasted time, falling in love wasted time, building landscapes wasted time, and everything else in life. Poor communication, mismatched cooperation, resource waste caused by misunderstandings, and so on. The vast majority were squandering resources. For Chen Yue, there was no need for rest, no need for meals, no need for travel. There were no communication breakdowns, no misunderstandings. Only a single-minded focus on work. It was no wonder the overall error rate was so low. Thus, on Jupiter XIV, under a model where daily operations were handled by the supercomputing center, with Chen Yue assigning tasks every hour and scanning the center every few seconds to correct errors, a grand-scale production unfolded. Time passed swiftly, and before long, it was the year 135 of the new era. That year, Jupiter 14 was finally fully developed. On it, Chen Yue had built a total of over 300 factories and mines, laid more than 800 kilometers of railway, and employed approximately 9 million robots. Serving as the brains of these industrial facilities were the 165 supercomputing centers Chen Yue had constructed, each housing anywhere from tens of thousands to over 1,065 nanometer process chips. Between Jupiter 14 and Jupiter V, the Wood 8 spacecraft, Chen Yue's latest generation of interstellar transport ships, improved from the Wood 7 model with greater speed, thrust, and capacity, shuttled back and forth ceaselessly day and night. Based on the characteristics and mineral distribution of the two planets, Chen Yue deliberately adjusted his industrial layout during this period. He transferred most low-end and basic industries to Jupiter XIV, retaining high-precision and advanced industries on Jupiter V. This created a robust demand for transportation between the two planets. On average, at least 100 Wood 8 spacecraft took off and landed between the two planets each day, transporting at least tens of thousands of tons of goods. The widespread use of the Wood 8 spacecraft also yielded another benefit for Chen Yue. He knew that sooner or later he would have to build true interstellar spacecraft. At this moment, the simple and primitive Wood 8 spacecraft served as Chen Yue's testing ground. He continuously experimented with various new technologies, new materials, more advanced engines, more efficient propellants, more stable communication and navigation modules, and greater maneuverability on the Wood 8 spacecraft. Once these technologies were proven mature, Chen Yue would begin constructing the first true interstellar spacecraft. At that time, his dreams could finally set sail. On Jupiter V, Chen Yue also built dozens of supercomputing centers, delegating most basic computations to them. At the same time, due to extremely low communication latency, allowing Chen Yue to monitor the supercomputing center's operation in real time, the overall error rate on Jupiter V only increased from the previous 2.6 to 4.2, an increase of less than double. Yet Chen Yue saved a significant amount of computational power, which he could invest in more critical tasks. There were many important tasks, but the most crucial of all was undoubtedly chip technology. During these years, besides building numerous supercomputing centers to reduce his own computational load, Chen Yue also took a risky step to enhance his computational power. He performed a surgery on his own brain. Chen Yue's brain was naturally the central computer of the Yinghua. This central computer had been designed to control a spaceship, prioritizing safety and reliability over raw computational power. In fact, some designs had even reduced computational capacity. Now Chen Yue made a thorough adjustment to it. For instance, he removed power limitations, canceled multiple verification modules, and eliminated computational constraints imposed for high radiation resistance, thereby fully unleashing its computational power. This resulted in an overall computational power increase of about 36. To this day, Chen Yue still did not know exactly what state he existed in within the computer. Operating on his own brain was undoubtedly extremely risky. Yet, even after taking such a huge risk to boost computational power and fully tapping the potential of the Yinghua spacecraft's central computer, the increased power was still devoured by immense demands. Fortunately, I have now fully mastered the 32-nanometer chip manufacturing process. Within the next 20 years, I hope to master the 7-nanometer process. By then I can build a new home for myself. The chip manufacturing process of the Yinghua spacecraft's central computer was indeed 7 nanometers. But its construction was not aimed at pursuing high computational power. Once Chen Yue mastered the 7-nanometer process, he could build a full-scale supercomputer designed for maximum computational power. At that time, Chen Yue could move into this new home. Conservatively estimated, this would bring at least a 50-fold increase in computational power. A 50-fold increase. Chen Yue was filled with anticipation. By then I can begin researching fundamental physics and advanced technologies, such as more advanced spacecraft nuclear fusion and high-thrust engines. Aboard the spacecraft Yinghua, Chen Yue manipulated a telescope, aiming it at the sky. The colossal Jupiter hung silently, its turbulent currents of gas rolling endlessly, weaving intricate patterns that exuded a certain beauty. Nearby, the radiant Saturn floated encircled by a magnificent ring. Countless stars dotted the pitch-black expanse of space, mysterious and profound. Gazing at the boundless night sky, Chen Yue couldn't help but recall the majestic river of galaxies, the dazzling remnants of supernovae, black holes, neutron stars, white dwarfs, the infinite secrets hidden within the cosmos, and so much more. The starry sky always stirs a longing within people, especially for Chen Yue at this moment. In the past, bound by the limitations of the human body, this longing remained merely a yearning. Now, with the hope of truly realizing it, the hope that one day he could roam the universe and explore its endless mysteries, this yearning grew even stronger. Alas, looking at his Mu-8 spacecraft, crafted with the most advanced technology, but still singular in function, ugly in form, and so inferior in performance that it couldn't even reach the farther reaches of space, Chen Yue let out a sigh. I must stay grounded and advance technology step by step. Take it slow, he thought. The pursuit of perfection in the industrial foundation, with gradual iterations and development, continued unabated. The exchanges between the two planets grew increasingly frequent. Time flew swiftly, and Chen Yue slowly propelled his technological level forward. In the 155th year of the new calendar, a methane ice mine on Amalthea was depleted. This mine was located about 500 kilometers from the spacecraft Yinghua. It was not large, only medium in scale. Here Chen Yue had deployed over 2,000 robots along with corresponding machinery and vehicles to handle the extraction of methane ice. A railway extended to this site, responsible for transporting the methane ice away. It had been in operation since the 45th year of the new calendar, a span of 110 years. The electricity generated by burning the methane ice from this mine powered the operations of Chen Yue's many machines. But now it was finally depleted. The mining area had transformed into a pit about a kilometer in diameter and over 100 meters deep. The bottom of the pit now exposed gray rock with no more methane ice for Chen Yue to extract. Once the mineral resources were exhausted, they were simply abandoned. After all, there were still many other methane ice mines on Amalthea and Colaroi. Yet this incident caught Chen Yue's attention and vigilance. He conducted a calculation tallying all the reserves of methane ice and solid oxygen mines he currently possessed against his consumption rate. The final calculation results appeared before Chen Yue. According to the current energy consumption growth curve, within at most 50 years, the methane ice resources on Amalthea and Colaroi would be exhausted, completely depleted. And methane ice was Chen Yue's most important energy source without equal. Without the electricity generated by burning methane ice, what would power his industrial facilities? Chen Yue knew this day would come eventually. After all, both Amalthea and Colaroi were too small. But he hadn't expected it to be so near, only 50 years away. I must find a new energy source, Chen Yue pondered quietly. At this stage, he was aware of only two forms of energy. The first was chemical energy, and the second was nuclear energy. Whether burning wood, coal, methane, or methane ice, they all fell under the category of chemical energy. Nuclear fission and nuclear fusion were nuclear energy. As for nuclear fusion, humanity at its peak had not mastered it, so naturally Chen Yue couldn't apply it either. Chen Yue did possess nuclear fission technology, but he hadn't found sufficient fissionable materials here, such as uranium-235 or plutonium-239. Nuclear energy was quickly dismissed. Chen Yue knew he would have to find a solution within chemical energy. However, on Amalthea and Colaroi, there was nothing else combustible besides methane ice. If there had been, he would have applied it right from the beginning of his arrival, instead of relying entirely on methane ice as a single fuel. This left Chen Yue in a predicament. My development speed will only accelerate and my energy demands will only grow. I must find a completely new way to supply energy. If these two planets are depleted, can I only obtain it from other celestial bodies? Chen Yue manipulated the telescope, beginning to observe the planets closer to him one by one. But only a moment later he gave up. The nearby moons of Jupiter were either too small, too tiny to possibly hold much methane ice, or too large, like the 4 Galilean moons, so vast that he couldn't conveniently or massively extract energy from them. Dismissing Jupiter's moons, Chen Yue turned his gaze to the core of the Jovian system, Jupiter itself. The primary component of the gas giant Jupiter was hydrogen. Hydrogen has a high calorific value, much higher than methane ice. If he had enough hydrogen as fuel, it could support his energy needs. Moreover, Jupiter's hydrogen was virtually inexhaustible. If he could extract enough hydrogen from Jupiter, Chen Yue stared at the immense Jupiter, his eyes nearly sparkling within the telescope. Yet after gazing for a long time, he could only sigh with regret and abandon this fantasy. It was for the same reason Jupiter was too massive. Jupiter alone was even more massive than the combined mass of the other 7 planets in the solar system. It was so massive that it could pull the solar system's center of mass from inside the sun to outside it. Chen Yue knew that, strictly speaking, the many planets of the solar system, including Earth, did not actually orbit the sun. In fact, they orbited the solar system's center of mass. Even the sun itself orbited this center of mass. Because the sun occupied the vast majority of the solar system's mass, this center of mass was usually inside the sun. But why was it outside in reality? It was due to Jupiter's existence. It was so massive that it pushed the center of mass outside the sun. To such a colossal celestial body, extracting hydrogen from it was nothing more than a dream for Chen Yue at this. If only I could extract hydrogen from Jupiter, how wonderful that would be. This situation of seeing, but not reaching, filled Chen Yue with deep regret. Is there any way to obtain enough hydrogen without going to Jupiter? Chen Yue silently pondered, silently reviewing the technical documents in his database. Suddenly a spark lit up in Chen Yue's eyes. I found a way. Jupiter possesses the most formidable magnetic field in the entire solar system, second only to the sun. Its magnetic field is tens of thousands of times more powerful than Earth's. It was precisely because of Jupiter's immensely strong magnetic field that it could shield Chen Yue when that remnant planet collided with the sun, triggering a massive solar flare eruption. Without the magnetic field, Chen Yue would have perished long ago, let alone built such an immense industrial foundation. The solution Chen Yue had discovered was closely tied to Jupiter's magnetic field. The overall structure of Jupiter's magnetic field resembles Earth's, but its internal architecture is exceedingly complex and vastly different. The primary cause of this phenomenon stems from Io. Io is an active volcanic moon with volcanic eruptions occurring ceaselessly upon its surface. These vigorous volcanoes eject massive quantities of sulfur dioxide, replenishing Jupiter's magnetosphere with approximately 1 ton every second. Under the sun's ultraviolet dissociation effect, this forms a plasma torus. This plasma torus possesses extraordinarily potent energy. Theoretically, it holds the potential to be harnessed for electricity generation. The problem, however, lies in its distance from Amalthea and Thebe, over 200,000 kilometers away. It was clearly impossible for Chen Yue to build a power station there and then string an electrical cable all the way back. Yet Chen Yue had a better approach. Energy did not necessarily have to be manifested as electrical power. He could build a power station there, use the electricity to directly electrolyze water into hydrogen and oxygen, then transport these elements to the power plants on Amalthea and Thebe, where they would be burned to generate heat and produce electricity. After combustion, hydrogen and oxygen recombine into water, which could be shipped back by spacecraft for electrolysis once more. Thus, in a continuous cycle, the energy of that plasma torus would be inexhaustibly harvested. In simple terms, even without direct access to Jupiter itself, this method allowed him to milk Jupiter's resources to meet his energy demands. Chen Yue's heart immediately surged with excitement. If this method truly works, then it'll have an endless, inexhaustible supply of energy. No matter how far I develop in the future, I won't have to worry about energy shortages. The issue now is whether this path, though theoretically feasible, can be realized in engineering terms. Theoretical feasibility and engineering implementation are two entirely different matters. Engineering implementation requires consideration of costs, benefits, losses, opportunity costs, and numerous other factors. Much like the early debate between hydrogen energy and electric vehicles on Earth, comparatively hydrogen-powered cars had clear advantages such as faster refueling and longer range. However, the engineering hurdles to its implementation were simply too numerous and formidable. A critical safety issue could never be fully resolved, leading to the eventual failure of that path. Now Chen Yue faced a similar dilemma. If in the end a trip to the plasma torus generated less electricity than the energy consumed by the spacecraft's round trip, it would be utterly pointless. Furthermore, the environment within the plasma torus was extremely harsh. The equipment he manufactured would likely require considerable effort and process improvements to function properly there. Chen Yue immediately formulated a plan and began steady implementation. In addition to the plasma torus energy extraction plan, he also devised several alternatives. These included a high-speed hydrogen extraction plan utilizing Jupiter's gravitational slingshot and energy extraction plans targeting the 4 Galilean moons, all progressing simultaneously. This way, if the primary plan failed, Chen Yue would not be left idle and helpless. Based on optical and radio telescope observations of the plasma torus, Chen Yue roughly estimated its environmental conditions and subsequently constructed the first plasma torus probe satellite, launching it via an improved rocket. It would orbit Jupiter alongside the plasma torus, measuring environmental parameters to lay the groundwork for future manufacturing. However, to Chen Yue's surprise, this specially designed probe malfunctioned and failed immediately upon reaching the internal electrical sparks directly incinerated its circuit board, rendering it a lifeless stone beyond. How could this happen? It shouldn't be like this. Chen Yue was utterly perplexed. In simulated environments, the probe's parameters should have allowed it to function perfectly. Where did it go wrong? Following standard procedure, Chen Yue should now iteratively improve the probe's performance, testing incrementally until the problem was identified and a truly suitable probe was built. But that would take too much time. Forget it, it'll do whatever saves time. Chen Yue made a bold decision, manufacturing over 300 probe satellites with varying parameters and launching them all at once. Wasn't it just industrial capacity? His industrial strength was immense now. Even 3,000 probes would be a mere trifle for him. This time, Chen Yue's gamble paid off. Upon reaching the plasma torus, a full 300 of the 300-plus probes were destroyed, leaving only 7 capable of normal operation. These 7 satellites shared a common trait: they possessed superior sealing and radiation resistance. Further investigation finally revealed the root of the problem. The energy of those plasmas was excessively high. Without adequate sealing or radiation resistance, internal circuits were compromised, leading to destruction. The radiation here seems higher than theoretical calculations suggested. No wonder this error occurred. Chen Yue mused thoughtfully. The existence of the plasma torus had been confirmed back in the Earth era, along with many of its physical properties. Upon arriving at the Jupiter system, Chen Yue had paid it little attention, naturally leading to this mistake. When theoretical calculations diverged from reality, there was no doubt the theory was flawed. As for the specific error, Chen Yue remained ignorant for now. He'll study it slowly when I have spare computational power, he thought. These 7 satellites conducted detailed surveys of the plasma torus physical properties, generating a wealth of invaluable data. 6 months later, Chen Yue finally executed his second launch. A space laboratory was sent into the plasma torus. This space laboratory would conduct a series of experiments: plasma torus power generation, water electrolysis, transport of hydrogen and oxygen back to Amalthea, and return of water to the plasma torus, all to comprehensively verify its engineering feasibility. Within the invisible plasma ring zone, a small space laboratory hovered silently. Beside it loomed the colossal Jupiter, and further away shone the bright Galilean moons, the still dazzling sun, and the boundless starry expanse. This space laboratory measured merely 3 meters by 2 meters by 2 meters, with an interior volume of less than 5 cubic meters. Its robust shell was sufficient to block the highly energetic plasma and withstand the violent radiation emanating from Jupiter. A liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen generator served as its heart, enabling it to operate even when external energy replenishment was unavailable. Under Chen Yue's control, a specially designed device for harvesting energy from the plasma ring, essentially milking Jupiter, was slowly activated. The outer hatch opened, and an antenna-like apparatus gradually extended outward. If all went well, and if Chen Yue's theoretical calculations were correct, as the space laboratory orbited Jupiter, a continuous stream of electricity should be generated and supplied to the lab's interior. Inside the laboratory were some liquid water and an electrolyzer. With external power, the electrolyzer could work, splitting the water into hydrogen and oxygen, which were then stored separately. Chen Yue watched intently, monitoring data from thousands of sensors on the space laboratory. Suddenly, a sensor sent a signal to Chen Yue via the communication antenna. Its status had just changed. And that change meant it had detected the generation of electricity. Chen Yue's spirits lifted. It really works. Electricity was indeed being produced. Power generation at the plasma ring was truly possible. Good. Now let's see the rate of generation, whether it matches theoretical predictions, and if it's engineeringly feasible. If the electricity generated was too little to even cover the energy consumption of a round trip for the spacecraft, then it would naturally lack engineering feasibility. Even if the power was sufficient but the surplus was minimal from an engineering perspective, it would hold little value. Chen Yue continued to focus, intently testing, calculating, and waiting meticulously bit by bit. Gradually, an hour passed. Chen Yue had gathered enough data. He inputted it into the computational model, and in an instant the final result was... At that moment, Chen Yue froze. The calculated result far exceeded his expectations, leaving him greatly astonished. Yet this surprise was a pleasant one. The power generation efficiency of the plasma ring was so high that Chen Yue could hardly believe it. Even calculated based on the current efficiency of the space laboratory, the total engineering efficiency was an astounding 456. 3. That is for every unit of energy invested Chen Yue could obtain for 563 units of energy in return, a yield of nearly fivefold. Moreover, this space laboratory was merely experimental. Its efficiency was actually not that high. If Chen Yue manufactured specialized power harvesting equipment and scaled it up, reducing losses through economies of scale, the expected returns could potentially reach tenfold or even more. Beautiful. I knew it. Chen Yue roared inwardly. With that, there was nothing more to say. He immediately abandoned the other plans and devoted all his efforts to advancing this one. The primary task of this plan was to construct a professional power station at Jupiter's plasma ring. It had to be large enough to harvest energy with sufficient efficiency, equipped with numerous electrolyzers, and capable of storing ample water, liquid hydrogen, and liquid oxygen. Under Chen Yue's direct command, the design for Power Station No. 1 quickly passed self-checks and entered the simultaneously production began on specialized robots for the plasma ring, along with supporting electrolyzers, power harvesters, custom steel, and dedicated transport spacecraft. A scene of bustling activity unfolded on Amalthea. Minerals and energy from various parts of Amalthea under Chen Yue's operation were transformed into components, robots, and spacecraft. The first batch of 10 Mu-8 spacecraft set sail, carrying corresponding parts and robots to the plasma ring. Their self-propelled robots retrieved these components in the zero-gravity environment and began assembling them directly in space. Then came the second batch, the third. A total of 9 batches comprising 156 spacecraft allowed Chen Yue to finally assemble this colossal structure with a maximum length of 100 meters, a maximum width of 56 meters, and a maximum height of 11 meters. It resembled an insect with over 20 pairs of wings flying majestically through the vastness of space. Those over 20 pairs, more than 40 wing-like structures, were all high-performance plasma ring power harvesters. Through interaction with the material of the plasma ring, they generated a continuous stream of electricity, which was transmitted into the cylindrical interior space. At this moment, Power Station No. 1 was complete. All components and systems had been debugged and were ready for production. Then let's begin. Hundreds of thousands of kilometers away, at Chen Yue's command, Power Station No. 1 trembled slightly, truly commencing its journey of milking Jupiter from the plasma ring. A massive current of electricity was generated from the harvesters, and tens of thousands of internal electrolyzers began working simultaneously. The produced hydrogen and oxygen were collected through separate pipes stored in tanks to cool naturally and eventually transformed into liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen. An improved Mu-8 transport spacecraft was already waiting nearby. After some time, its 2 tanks were filled with liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen respectively. It set sail heading back toward Amalthea. On Amalthea, Chen Yue had previously upgraded and converted an ice-methanol solid oxygen thermal power plant into a hydrogen-oxygen power plant. The arrival of this Mu-8 spacecraft brought the crucial fuel. The combustion chamber finally ignited, releasing immense heat that boiled water, driving the generator to spin. Ultimately, a steady stream of electricity was produced, feeding into the vast power grid Chen Yue had built, becoming the energy that drove machines, propelled trains, and powered factories. The engineering test of Power Station No. 1 was a complete success. Chen Yue looked at the numerous, still operating methanol oxygen power plants, and a surge of heroic pride swelled within him. Power Station No. 2 commenced construction. This newly completed No. 1 power extraction station still retained a certain experimental nature. Chen Yue had not dared to build it too large. After all, it involved too many domains he had never touched before. Starting with a grand, swift push might lead to mishaps. Advancing in small, rapid steps was the true path. During the construction of the No. 1 power extraction station, Chen Yue accumulated rich experience and developed many improvement ideas. Thus, the conditions for building the No. 2 station had matured. Calculated by power generation capacity, the total installed capacity of the No. 1 station reached 15 megawatts, meaning it could generate 1500 kilowatt-hours per hour. However, that was the level at the plasma ring. Transported to Amalthea, there were significant losses. These 1500 kilowatt-hours could electrolyze approximately 3 tons of water, producing about 0.33 tons of hydrogen and 667 tons of oxygen. When shipped to Amalthea, burning this liquid hydrogen and oxygen to convert back into electricity incurred further losses. At current efficiency, it could generate roughly 780 kilowatt-hours. In other words, the 1500 kilowatt-hours at the plasma ring upon reaching Amalthea and being applied to Chen Yue's industrial facilities shrank by about half. After deducting the losses from spaceship transport, only about 30 remained. But there was no alternative. Electrolyzing water was the only energy storage method Chen Yue could employ at this moment. Other methods lacked engineering feasibility. The only promising one was a method called flywheel energy storage. Simply put, it converted electrical energy into kinetic energy by accelerating a rotor to extremely high speeds in a vacuum environment to store energy. But this technology was too advanced. The energy storage flywheels Chen Yue could produce at this point were less efficient than hydrogen-oxygen storage, so it had to wait for future technological development. As for battery storage, that was even more impractical. With limited capacity and excessive weight, it was inferior to hydrogen-oxygen storage. Yet even with a final efficiency of only 30, Chen Yue felt no disappointment. It couldn't be helped. At the plasma ring, Jupiter's resources were virtually inexhaustible, impossible to deplete. Moreover, the power extraction station was essentially a one-time investment yielding lifelong benefits. So what if the efficiency was low? Just build more of them. Chen Yue lacked nothing except engineering capability. Thus the No. 2 power extraction station with a total installed capacity 10 times that of the No. 1 was immediately launched. At the plasma ring, it could generate 1600 kilowatt-hours per hour on average. With more advanced processes, its total losses were lower than the No. 1 station. After delivery to Amalthea, about 32 remained, meaning Amalthea received roughly 5120 kilowatt-hours per hour. That amounted to 450 million kilowatt-hours per year. Furthermore, while the No. 2 station achieved 10 times the installed capacity of the No. 1, its volume increased by less than 4 times. At this point, the total annual electricity consumption of the 2 planets under Chen Yue's name, Amalthea and XIV, had reached 1 trillion kilowatt-hours and was still growing rapidly at an average rate of 6 per year. Based on this consumption, Chen Yue needed to build a total of 2300 power extraction stations of equivalent efficiency to the No. 2 station at the plasma ring, with an additional 134 stations required each year. This number was terrifying and unimaginable even for humanity at its peak. But for Chen Yue, it was completely irrelevant. For Chen Yue, building factories in space or on a planet's surface made little difference. It was still because Amalthea and 14 were too small, making rocket and spaceship launches extremely convenient. A factory of the No. 2 station scale was considered small on a planetary surface. There were factories 10 or 100 times larger. Thus, when constructing the No. 3 power extraction station based on accumulated engineering experience, mature construction techniques, and recent improvements, the No. 3 station directly increased capacity tenfold over the No. 2, while its volume increased by less than 3 times. After the No. 3, the rate of efficiency improvement began to slow. The performance of the No. 4 reached only 1.2 times that of the No. 3, while its volume was reduced to 0.8 times. The No. 5 saw some improvement, but even less. After the initial leaps, the power extraction station technology Chen Yue mastered entered a phase of slow, iterative enhancement. By the time the No. 6 station was built, the technology had finally matured and stabilized. Significant improvements were unlikely in the short term. So Chen Yue finalized the design using the No. 6 station as a template for mass production on an assembly line. The newly finalized standard power extraction station had an installed capacity of 250 megawatts at the plasma ring. After transmission to Amalthea or XIV, deducting all losses, the final effective energy retention reached 36. That meant one station could provide approximately 7.89 billion kilowatt-hours per year. About 130 such stations would cover all of Chen Yue's electricity consumption. While slowly reducing the capacity of the icy-methane-oxygen power plants, the number of hydrogen-oxygen power plants began to increase rapidly. 10 years after the standard station was finalized, 30 of the icy-methane-oxygen power plants had been replaced. At this time, an average of 7.0 tons of hydrogen and 2.0 tons of oxygen. The oxygen deficit was supplemented by direct mining from the 2 planets, were shipped daily from the plasma ring to Amalthea and XIV, while 6.0 tons of water were sent back to the plasma ring. A total of 600 ships were responsible for transporting hydrogen, oxygen, and water. These 600 heavy transport vessels shuttled endlessly between the plasma ring and the 2 planets. In the skies of the 2 planets, the exhaust trails of the transport ships shone like bright stars, illuminating nearly the entire planet. A spectacular sight. Sustained by the energy from the plasma ring, Chen Yue's industrial facilities operated day and night without. Fortunately, these 600 ships required low technical demands, essentially just an engine attached to a large empty shell. Otherwise, Chen Yue, who couldn't even build a single true interstellar spaceship, would never have been able to create this seemingly massive fleet. Sometimes Chen Yue himself was amazed by his own power. Because these 600 ships, along with the power extraction stations at the plasma ring, the numerous robots, countless machines, factories, trains, and equipment, all were created by his own hands and entirely under his control. Recalling the days when he first landed on Amalthea with only a single robot, Chen Yue felt as if an era had passed. But now is not the time for complacency. Chen Yue silently admonished himself, my technological level is still too low. I can't even build a simple fission power station, let alone nuclear fusion. Otherwise, why would I go to such lengths, mobilizing such immense forces to draw power from the plasma ring? I must redouble my efforts and strive to develop technology faster. With an endless supply of energy from the plasma ring, Chen Yu's burden was immediately greatly alleviated. In the following period, Chen Yue continued to construct numerous power collection stations there, striving to reduce local energy consumption to below 10 of the total within a decade and eventually compress it to zero at an appropriate time, thereby completely resolving the energy shortage. But at this moment, a new issue came to Chen Yu's attention. Due to the limitations of their own technological level, these interstellar transport ships, tasked with energy transfer, suffered from an excessively high failure rate. Even though Chen Yue had simplified their structures as much as possible, strictly speaking, they were merely a remote control system plus an engine and cargo hold. The failure rate remained too high. This not only consumed a vast amount of Chen Yu's computational power, but when too many broke down, it severely disrupted the energy supply plan. On several occasions, Chen Yue was even forced to limit the electricity usage of certain factories. Currently, with just over 30 of the energy supply, there were already over 600 heavy transport ships shuttling between the plasma ring and Jupiter V and Jupiter 14. When the supply reached 100, wouldn't the number of transport ships have to be as high as 200? With the annual increase in energy demand, wouldn't that require 2500 ships, or even more? The thought of needing 2500 ships running day and night to transport energy. The mere idea of the daily maintenance and repairs required gave Chen Yue a headache. It was impossible to improve ship performance in a short time. Therefore, an alternative space transport solution with high reliability, low energy consumption, and low computational demands, one that wouldn't require too much of his attention, had to be found. Chen Yue pondered for a long time, meticulously searching through the knowledge base, when suddenly his eyes lit up. Electromagnetic catapult technology. This might be applicable to interstellar transport. As soon as the idea struck, he acted immediately. Chen Yue immediately began engineering verification. The principle of electromagnetic catapult technology was actually quite simple. Its essence was merely using electromagnetic acceleration to accelerate and launch a payload. At its most basic, it was converting electrical energy into kinetic energy. Relevant research existed even during the Earth era, though it was mostly applied in military contexts such as electromagnetic railguns. Chen Yue planned to build an electromagnetic catapult directly at the plasma ring, then load liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen into metal containers and directly launch these containers to Jupiter V or Jupiter 14. The launch velocity could be lowered, for instance, to an average of 40 meters per second. This way, after selecting a suitable trajectory, these metal containers would naturally enter an orbit around Jupiter V upon arrival. Then he could directly transport these containers to the planet's surface. Water ice destined for the plasma ring could also be handled in the same manner. First, build a similar electromagnetic catapult in orbit around Jupiter V, then transport the water ice to the orbital station and use the electromagnetic catapult to launch it directly toward the plasma ring. This way, there would be no need to build and operate so many ships. It would save not only computational power, but also a vast amount of energy. The only drawback was that to allow these metal containers to enter orbit directly, their velocity had to be kept at around 40 meters per second. At this speed, it would take a full 2 months or more to travel from the plasma ring to Jupiter V, which was somewhat lengthy. But that was manageable. As long as the first one arrived, the subsequent ones would follow in a continuous stream, ensuring the energy supply was not affected. At that moment, the first electromagnetic catapult had already been constructed at the plasma ring. Under Chen Yu's remote command, a metal container roughly the size of a standard Earth shipping container, with an internal volume of about 25 cubic meters, fully loaded with liquid oxygen and weighing approximately 28.5 tons, was placed at the launch end of the electromagnetic catapult. Powered by a massive electrical supply, electromagnetic force acted upon the metal container gradually. At the moment it left the muzzle, its velocity reached 42.6 meters per second, and it began its slow journey toward Jupiter V along a preset trajectory. Chen Yue collected all the data generated from this launch and began a detailed analysis. Over 2 months later, after a long voyage, the container successfully arrived near Jupiter V. Jupiter versus gravitational pull acted upon it, altering its trajectory and drawing it closer. The metal container had successfully entered orbit. Chen Yue immediately launched a table-shaped rocket into space, which then attached itself to the container. The rocket's engine ignited, decelerating it, and slowly towed it down to the surface of Jupiter V, landing precisely in an open space in front of a hydrogen-oxygen power station. The first test was a complete success. During this period, Chen Yue conducted a second, third, and up to a 16th test, launching a total of 16 containers. With each test, efficiency improved over the previous one. After 16 tests, Chen Yue felt he had mastered the technology. Then let's begin large-scale construction. Chen Yue was immensely invigorated. Consequently, the following month, the first batch of 100 standard model electromagnetic cannons was assembled at the plasma ring. Its appearance resembled a thin tube inserted into a cube covered with wings. Those wings were power collection devices that supplied energy to the entire electromagnetic cannon. The cube was also equipped with reverse thrusters to provide stabilization force. Additionally, sufficient space was reserved for ships to dock temporarily stored containers and complete the filling. At that moment, numerous fast transit ships retrieved the hydrogen and oxygen ionized over a period from various power collection and electrolysis units and delivered them to the electromagnetic cannon. After unloading, the electromagnetic cannon's internal machinery immediately filled the containers with liquid hydrogen and oxygen. The containers were then placed at the launch, and the catapult was activated and a container was launched. With current efficiency, the electromagnetic cannon could launch one container every 10 minutes, each container holding 28.5 tons of liquid oxygen or liquid hydrogen. Thus, in a single day, 144 containers could be launched, delivering a total mass of 4100 tons. With 100 electromagnetic cannons that amounted to 4100 tons per day. At that time, the fleet of heavy interstellar transport ships, already numbering 700, was delivering only an average of 3200 tons of liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen per day. Based on these figures, Chen Yue would only need to build a total of 260 electromagnetic cannons at the plasma ring to fully meet the existing energy demand. In reality, even fewer electromagnetic cannons would be needed. The reason was simple: this method was more energy efficient than ship transport.